Chapter 89. Zheng Zumo now understood why he lost his composure when he heard her sing Celestial Magpie Bridge. It was because he was the one who wrote the poem. He probably didn't think that the poem written on the sky lantern would be picked up by Sister Ruoqing and spread throughout Qing and Prefecture. Yesterday he had been dismissive of Su Wentian's poems. With a wave of his hand, he had written 2 poems of a very high standard. Before this, no one knew that there was such a talent in Qing and Fu. This made everyone very confused. All of this could be explained. This was because he was Li Yi, the one who wrote, "If the love between 2 lovers lasts for a long time, why should they be together day and night?" He was also the talent Li Yi that Sister Ruoqing herself and countless women in Qing and Prefecture yearned for. Li Yi. But the Li Yi who wrote, "If love lasts, why do we stay together day and night?" Zhao Yunru and the women of the Yuning Poetry Society were dumbfounded. They murmured to themselves, stunned for a moment and still in disbelief. He was the most mysterious scholar in Qing and Prefecture recently, the one whose Celestial Magpie Bridge made Yang Yanzhou concede defeat, the one who made Xin Zhao declare that he would no longer compose Qixi poems, the one who countless women, including themselves, wanted to meet. Zhao Yunru and the others' first reaction was disbelief. But when they thought of the 2 poems yesterday, they no longer had any doubts. In such a short amount of time, how could Qing and Prefecture produce 2 talents who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Yang Yanzhou and Xin Zhao? So they were the same person. The young prince Li Xian stood there in a daze. His expression was one of shock. Was this guy famous in Qing and Prefecture? Why hadn't he heard of him before? "What are you all standing there for?" Li looked at them with confusion. He shook his head and walked toward the water pavilion in the center. At this time, because of Xin Zhao, the water pavilion in the center had attracted the attention of countless people. "Did you hear that young Master Shen is going to compete with someone in poetry today?" "What? Isn't young Master Shen the number 2 talent? Who else does he need to compete with? Could it be Yang Yanzhou?" "That doesn't seem to be the case. We'll know what's going on once we keep watching. How dare he compete with young Master Shen? Isn't he digging his own grave?" Under Xin Zhao's deliberate efforts, the news quickly spread throughout the entire Mianxiu Garden, and the crowd began to gather in that direction. When Wan Ruoqing, Zheng Zumo, and the woman from the Yuning Poetry Club walked over behind Li Yi, they were also shocked by such a scene. But when he thought of his poem, The Immortal at the Magpie Bridge, Xin Zhao no longer dared to compose any more Qixi poems and his heart immediately calmed down. "Is that young master going to compete with young Master Shen? That young master is so handsome. This is a competition of literary talent, not who is good-looking. But he really is better looking than young Master Shen." It was not convenient for the women in the hall to get close, so they could only watch from afar. Occasionally their voices could be heard. In the center of the waterside pavilion, in a spacious pavilion, Xin Zhao was already standing in front of a table. On the table was a brush, ink, paper, and inkstone. His expression was calm and unreadable. At this moment, this place had already been surrounded by many scholars. As the second most talented scholar in Qing and Prefecture, Xin Zhao was naturally a hot topic. The news of Xin Zhao's poetry competition tomorrow would definitely be the topic of conversation among the scholars of Qing and Prefecture. Brother Yanzhou. Yang Yanzhou and the scholar with the surname Wan were also in the crowd. Suddenly, a voice came from beside them. Looking back, they found it was a scholar they were familiar with. That person looked at Yang Yanzhou and asked in confusion, "Someone actually agreed to compete with Xin Zhao in poetry? Does he not know that in Qing and Prefecture, Xin Zhao's poetry skills are second only to Brother Yanzhou's? This is a situation where he will definitely lose. Brother Yanzhou, what do you think about this?" Yang Yanzhou shook his head and said slowly, "Definitely lose? I don't think so." "Brother Yanzhou, what do you mean?" Yang Yanzhou actually didn't think Xin Zhao was optimistic. That person's expression froze. He had a faint premonition. Tonight there would probably be big news. The surrounding people had been paying attention to the conversation between Yang Yanzhou and him. Hearing this, they immediately focused their attention and listened carefully. What if that person is the scholar who wrote, "Raising a cup to the bright moon, facing the shadows to form 3 people"? After Yang Yanzhou said this, the surrounding crowd was silent for a moment. Then they immediately burst into an uproar. It was also at this time that Li Yi and the others finally walked over. When they walked to the table beside Xin Zhao turned his head to look at him and said lightly, "Since it is the Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet, the 2 of us will use the Mid-Autumn Festival as the theme. We will each write a poem. As for who will win and who will lose, let the scholars here judge." Naturally, Li Yi had no objections to this. After Xin Zhao finished speaking, he already picked up his brush and began to write on the Xian paper in front of him. His brush moved like dragons and snakes. Regardless of the content, it was full of vigor. A scholar came closer and stretched his head to take a look. His face involuntarily revealed an expression of envy. He murmured, as expected of the second scholar. This new Mid-Autumn Festival poem is actually better than the one he just took out. After reading out Xin Zhao's unfinished poem in a low voice, the surrounding scholars all gasped in admiration. Xin Zhao's expression did not change, but he was very proud of himself. This poem was originally prepared to compete with Yang Yanzhou tonight. It was his hope of winning the title of the first scholar in Qing'an Prefecture. Naturally, the standard of this poem was not low. Xin Zhao had already written half a poem, but the scholar opposite him only picked up his brush. Someone walked closer, and when they stretched their head to take a look, they found that the Xian paper in front of him was empty. There were no words. Could it be he knows that he can't beat Xin Zhao, so he got cold feet? Just as everyone was having these suspicions, little did they know that at this moment, Li Yi was also in a bit of a dilemma. Just now, he had casually picked up his brush and had forgotten that with his unique handwriting, no one present knew how to appreciate it. If he wrote it in this kind of situation, he was afraid that it would be embarrassing. After thinking about it, he made up his mind, dipped the brush in ink and put the brush down. Very quickly, familiar handwriting appeared on the surface of the paper. Wan Ruoqing and Zheng Zimo lowered their heads to look. After seeing the unique handwriting, they looked at each other and no longer had any doubts in their hearts. This handwriting was the same as the original manuscript of the Immortals of the Magpie Bridge. Other than him, which other scholar could write this? The young prince, Li Xian, looked down in confusion. His eyes suddenly widened as if he had seen something inconceivable. Seeing that he had finally put down his brush, a moment later, someone couldn't resist his curiosity and came forward to take a look. Suddenly, an extremely shocked expression appeared on his face, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He raised his head to look at Li Yi, then looked at the handwriting on the paper with some uncertainty. Finally, his expression became strange. This handwriting. I'm afraid that only a child who has just learned how to write would be able to write this? Following that person's low murmur, a few more people came forward. Wan Ruoqing's pretty face changed slightly when she saw the change in everyone's expression. She immediately took a step forward, grabbed a piece of paper from the side table, and hurriedly began to write on it. A moment later, she looked at Li Yi again. After distinguishing the words and sentences, she started writing again on the paper raft. During this process, an indescribable expression gradually appeared on her pretty face as she looked at the words she had finished transcribing. When Li Yi stopped writing to check if he had missed anything, a piece of paper filled with hairpin-style small regular script had already been passed out of Wan Ruoqing's hands. Let's see what he has written. After seeing Li Yi's handwriting, the surrounding scholars began to doubt whether he had ever been educated. They smiled as they took the paper and looked at it. Shui Diao Getu. The first thing that entered their eyes were these 4 words. When will the moon be bright and clear? Holding a cup of wine, I asked the clear sky. Someone held the paper and read it softly. Not long after, the surrounding noise gradually quieted down. Chapter 90. Shui Diao Getu. Shui Diao Getu. I'm afraid no one will dare to compose a Mid-Autumn Festival poem today. A blank expression appeared on the scholar's face. He had already been shaken by the paper raft in his hand. It's not just today. I'm afraid that from now on, it will be difficult to compose a Mid-Autumn Festival poem. Yang Yanzhou's eyes were also filled with shock. Even though he was known as the #1 scholar in Qing'an Prefecture, he would never be able to compose a poem of this standard. At this moment, all the scholars at the scene were no longer as noisy as before. Yang Yanzhou's gaze once again swept across the paper raft, and finally noticed the name at the bottom. His heart suddenly jumped and he exclaimed, Li Yi. What? Hearing this, everyone's bodies trembled. They all lowered their heads. In the next moment, an even greater uproar erupted. Is Li Yi from Immortal Magpie Bridge? That Drinking Alone Under the Moon was also written by him. The moment they saw the name of the poem, the shock in their hearts exceeded the poem itself. Ever since the Mid-Autumn Festival a month ago, everyone had their own guesses as to who the author of Immortal Magpie Bridge was. But it was undeniable that this person's talent was astonishing. With just one Mid-Autumn Festival poem, he had already been elevated to the same status as Yang Yanzhou and Xin Zhao. Including Yang Yanzhou, who knew how many people wanted to meet this scholar named Li Yi, but no one was able to do so. No one thought that he would appear in such a manner. With a wave of his hand, he produced an extremely high-standard Mid-Autumn Festival poem. Not just Xin Zhao but even among all the scholars in the Jing Kingdom who could compare to him. Thinking of this, everyone couldn't help but glance at Xin Zhao, who was still happily writing. The expressions on their faces were especially interesting. A month ago, because of the Immortal Magpie Bridge, Xin Zhao tore his proud work into pieces in front of all the scholars in Qingyan Prefecture. He announced that he would never compose a Mid-Autumn Festival poem again. From today onwards, he probably wouldn't even be able to compose a Mid-Autumn Festival poem. If two lovers love each other for a long time, why would they stay together day and night? Raising a cup to the bright moon, the shadow becomes three people. May we live together for a long time, Yang Yanzhou muttered to himself, and a self-mocking smile appeared on his face. He said, everyone says that I, Yang Yanzhou, am the #1 scholar in Qingyan Prefecture. When I compete with others, I have never tasted defeat in poetry. Today, I know that there are people better than you. From now on, the title of #1 scholar in Qingyan Prefecture should not be mentioned again. Brother Yanzhou, Scholar Wan opened his mouth, but in the end he only patted his shoulder and didn't say anything. The Immortal on the Magpie Bridge, Drinking Alone Under the Moon, Shuidiao Getu, these poems were enough to scare many people to death. If Yang Yanzhou still carried the title of the foremost scholar in Qingyan Prefecture, this was not praise for him but a great mockery. He looked at the back of the scholar with a complicated expression and sighed in his heart. Since Li Yi was born, how could Yang Yanzhou be born? He couldn't help but look in Xin Zhao's direction. He must have committed too many sins in his past life to have to compete with this kind of person. After today, Xin Zhao would probably have a hard time keeping a foothold among the scholars in Qingyan Prefecture. Look, even though this style of writing is not restricted by rules, the strokes are smooth, the structure is simple, and the strokes are continuous. Amidst the frenzy, there is a hint of elegance. I'm afraid that he is quite accomplished in calligraphy. A scholar stared at the manuscript on the table and suddenly exclaimed. When the crowd heard this, they all lowered their heads to look at it. For some reason, the words that looked like a child's scribble now looked much more pleasing to the eye. There seemed to be a certain rhythm between the lines. Thinking about it carefully, what the scholar said just now did seem to make some sense. Brother Wang's words are reasonable. Our eyes were blind and almost made a mistake. Not bad, not bad. How could someone with such talent not know calligraphy? Could it be that this style was created by this brother? Yang Yanzhou stood to the side and listened to the discussions of the crowd. A trace of doubt floated onto his face. Could it be that the other party's cultivation level was too high? Even with his skill in calligraphy, he could not comprehend the beauty of this style? Even Li Yi couldn't help but blush when he heard these words. He coughed to hide the awkwardness in his heart. When he put down his brush, he saw Li Xian, Wan Ruoqing, Zheng Zumo, and the others standing behind him. They looked at him with a complicated expression. What is it? Is there ink on my face? Li Yi was stunned and asked in confusion. He reached out and wiped his face. He looked down at his palms. There was no ink? No one nodded and no one spoke. Li Xian looked at him with a burning gaze. It was as if he was meeting him for the first time. Originally, he thought that the other party was an interesting scholar who was good at painting, greedy for money, and had a low tolerance for alcohol. On top of that, he had cured his mother's depression. His impression of him improved greatly and he was willing to interact with him, but who would have thought that this scholar, who did not have any outstanding qualities other than his good looks, was so talented that even the top scholar of Qingyan Prefecture had to admit defeat? This guy was even better at hiding than he was. Wan Ruoqing, Zheng Zumo, and the others were just as shocked as he was. First, they found out that the young master from yesterday was Li Yi, the one who created Immortal Magpie Bridge. Before they could recover, Shuidiao Getu appeared out of nowhere. Not only did it stun all the scholars present, it also stunned them. Especially when they remembered that he was a member of the Yunying Poetry Society in name, they all wondered if they were dreaming. Pa! Xin Zhao threw the brush in his hand onto the table. The writing on the Shen paper was vigorous and powerful. It was vigorous and free. Even if one ignored the content, it could still be considered a good piece of calligraphy. After all, his reputation as the second scholar did not come from nowhere. To be recognized by so many proud scholars in Qingyan Prefecture, Xin Zhao definitely had some ability. He turned his head and saw that the scholar opposite him seemed to have finished writing. The corner of his mouth twitched and he strode over. Because of the distance, when Xinjiao was concentrating on writing, he did not hear the discussion. At this moment he walked in front of Li Yi's table and lowered his head to look. His expression froze for a moment, then he laughed loudly. "Is this your work, or is it a child's random scribbling?" At this moment, Xinjiao no longer had any doubts about the outcome of this competition. However, as he laughed, his laughter gradually became softer. Because at this moment he was the only one laughing. The surrounding talents all looked at him with a strange expression. The smile on Xinjiao's face froze. An extremely bad feeling suddenly arose in his heart. "Brother Xin." At this moment Su Wenyan walked over in a daze. In his hand was a paper raft. He looked at Li Yi with a complicated expression and handed the paper raft to Xinjiao. Chapter 91. At the other end of the pavilion, countless women raised their heads and looked in a certain direction, their hearts filled with anticipation. In the pavilion where the competition was taking place, other than a few talented women, almost all of them were men. With their status, it was naturally not appropriate for them to go over. "Who do you guys think will win this competition?" A pretty woman asked with her hand on her cheek. "Of course it will be young Master Shen." "I also think it will be young Master Shen." "Yes, young Master Shen is so talented, how could he lose to a nobody?" The surrounding women all spoke up, their thoughts shockingly in unison. No one felt that the nameless scholar could win against the second talent of Qing and Fu, Xinjiao. After all, Xinjiao had been famous in Qing and Fu for a long time. In the hearts of these women, his position was naturally higher. "But that young master isn't a nobody," a young girl interrupted. Hearing this, a woman asked, "Right, I still don't know what his name is. Xiao Yun, do you know?" The young woman shook her head and said, "I also don't know what that young master is called, but when I came over from that side, I heard them say that young master is the one who composed Drinking Alone Under the Moon, and Nian knew yesterday." "What? It's actually that scholar?" Among these women, there were clearly many who knew these two poems. After a moment of surprise, they said hesitantly, "If it's that scholar, he might not necessarily lose." "But why is young Master Shin competing with that young master in poetry?" Competing in poetry between scholars was a very common thing and not something to be surprised about. But usually, if there was no conflict between the two, it would just be a normal exchange of pointers. But if it was elevated to the level of a battle, it meant that the conflict between the two could not be resolved. The young woman who had just spoken looked around and said somewhat mysteriously, "I heard that because young Master Shin made things difficult for the talented women of the Yuning Poetry Society, that young master, as a member of the Yuning Poetry Society, could not stand young Master Shin's actions, so he stood out." Everyone knows what happened next. How is it possible? How could young Master Shin be this kind of person? I've heard before that Xinjiao was arrogant and narrow-minded. I thought it was just a rumor. Who would have thought? I suddenly don't want young Master Shin to win. Me too? After the young girl's words were confirmed by a few other women who were also in the know, the balance in these women's hearts finally tilted. At this moment, a young lady dressed like a servant ran over from afar with a paper raft in her hand. She ran to the lady's side and handed the paper raft to her while panting. "Is there any news from there?" When the women saw this, they all crowded around him. How was it? How was it? Who won? When will the bright moon appear?" I asked the clear sky with a cup of wine in my hand. "I wonder what year it is in the heavenly palace." That woman cast her gaze up and recited in a low voice. Her beautiful eyes suddenly burst out with a strange splendor. The few women gathered their heads, and after a moment, their pretty faces revealed the same expression as hers. This was written by that young master?" After a moment, the woman raised her head and looked at the young servant girl. She asked in disbelief, "Miss name." The young maid had run all the way here and was panting from exhaustion. She finally caught her breath and opened her big eyes wide. She hurriedly pointed at the bottom corner of the paper raft and said, "Name? What name?" The young lady, who looked like a well-bred lady, looked in the direction that the young maid was pointing. In the next moment, her beautiful eyes involuntarily widened. Her cherry lips slightly parted as she cried out in surprise, "Li Yi." The name Li Yi was not an unfamiliar name to the women of Qing and Fu. Ever since the Immortal Magpie Bridge came out, it was unknown how many young girls in love, young married women on lonely nights in the depths of their chambers, would recite, "If the feelings between two could last forever, why would they stay together day and night?" while thinking of their absent lovers. Even those unmarried young girls would imagine a certain scene in their minds. Perhaps in their erotic dreams at night, they would occasionally dream of that scholar named Li Yi. For the women of this era, a man's talent was, without a doubt, a fatal attraction to them. Appearance was actually ranked lower. Of course, if he was a scholar with both talent and appearance, he would certainly be pursued by countless women. Is that the Li Yi from the Immortal of the Magpie Bridge? Ah, that handsome gentleman, is that Li Yi? In an instant, countless women raised their heads and looked in the direction of the water pavilion in the center. Their eyes were filled with a strange light. I hope that people live long, thousands of miles apart. When Xinjiao read to this point, his voice was already trembling. Fine beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. He suddenly raised his head to look at him and said in a trembling voice, "You are that, the Immortal of the Magpie Bridge. Brother, if you have finished writing, why don't you hand it over to the scholars to judge?" Li looked at him and asked with a smile. Hearing this, Xinjiao's face turned pale. He knew his own limits. The other party had even brought out such words. What need was there to judge? He was just asking to be humiliated. Lost. Xinjiao's face was pale. After squeezing out these words from between his teeth, he turned and left. "Brother, please wait." Seeing that Xinjiao was about to leave, Li Yi hurriedly called out to him. "What else do you want?" A trace of anger appeared on Xinjiao's face. He had already lost face in front of everyone today. Was the other party still not willing to let it go? Li didn't speak, but his eyes looked at his waist. Xinjiao finally remembered something. His face darkened even more. He tore off the jade pendant at his waist and casually threw it over. Li hurriedly caught it. If it was broken, 300 liang of silver would be gone. When he walked to the side of his table, Xinjiao's footsteps paused. He grabbed the poem he had just written and tore it into pieces. The scholars saw this familiar scene and couldn't help but sigh in their hearts. If they had known this would happen, they wouldn't have done it in the first place. Li Yi held the jade pendant in his hand. In his heart he was thinking about going to a pawn shop later. 300 liang of silver was enough to rent a shop in a slightly more prosperous area in Qing and Prefecture. At that moment, a delicate young girl walked in from outside. She walked to Li Yi's side and asked gently, "May I ask if you are Li Yi Li?" Li didn't know what this young girl wanted. He nodded in confusion. The young girl smiled and handed over a piece of paper. "Will you be free tomorrow? My young mistress would like to invite you to her residence for a chat." This looks like Miss Chen's servant. Miss Chen is official Chen's daughter? Seeing this, all of the candidates had expressions of shock and envy on their faces. Before Li Yi could react, a few more young girls walked in from outside. After bowing to Li Yi, they spoke in a gentle voice. "My young mistress admires your talent very much. Tomorrow there will be a banquet at the Drunken Fragrance Brothel. Will you be free?" My young mistress, that's Miss Chen's servant, that's Lu Qiaoqiao's servant, even Prefectural Magistrate Dong's daughter." Behind Li Yi, the little prince, Li Xian, stared blankly at this scene. His expression was incomparably complicated. Chapter 92. Since they were daughters of noble families, they had been taught from a young age that their every action had to be dignified and courteous. Not to mention daughters of noble families like the daughter of Magistrate Dong or the daughter of the Chen family, even the slightly more famous courtesans of Qing and Prefecture were usually very reserved and would never publicly invite a stranger. Although most of these girls had only sent their own servant girls, the personal servant girls represented their own wishes. Li Xian really couldn't understand why a mere poem would have such a strong attraction for these girls. It should be known that even though he was a little prince and a relative of the imperial family, these girls only maintained proper etiquette when they saw him. They definitely wouldn't go this far. In this aspect, his influence as a little prince wasn't even as great as Yang Yanzhou or Xin Zhao and other famous scholars in Qingyan Prefecture. But he had never heard of the daughter of Magistrate Dong ever inviting Yang Yanzhou. Li Xian was very certain that if Li Yi nodded his head right now, perhaps there would be many girls willing to offer themselves to sleep with him tonight. This kind of thing was not rare for scholars in Qingyan Prefecture. After tonight, his talent would spread. In the future, he wouldn't even have to pay to visit brothels, and there would probably be girls willing to throw themselves at him. Don't doubt this. There are historical records that show Lu Yong and Tang Bohu were both masters who didn't pay to visit brothels. Spending a night with the #1 scholar of Qing and Prefecture was a good opportunity for those prostitutes to become famous. If they could get him to write a poem, something along the lines of flirtatious, graceful, and devastatingly beautiful. It would be a good hype and would greatly increase the attention of the market. And this kind of handsome, talented scholar was the ideal candidate for Rui in the hearts of the daughters of noble families. In his mind, the scene of Li Yi being surrounded by all kinds of girls floated up. If he could receive his true teachings, in the vast Qing'an prefecture, would there be a girl he couldn't handle? Thinking of this, Li Xian made a decision in his heart. He was definitely going to be a friend. Looking at the girls in front of him handing over handkerchiefs, invitations and the like, Li Yi felt a headache coming on. After living 2 lives he really couldn't handle such a scene. He looked to Lu Rui for help, only to find that she was standing there, staring at Zheng Zimo. No one knew what she was thinking. Just when Li Yi was about to be overwhelmed by the enthusiasm of these girls, Mississippi Lu finally looked over as if she had heard the call in his heart. Li Yi gave her a look and Lu Rui walked over slowly. The girls felt a gentle force pushing them away. Then they saw the lady in white grab the young man's shoulder, and with a light leap, the 2 of them rose into the air, flew over the heads of the candidates and flew out of the pavilion. In the blink of an eye they disappeared before their eyes. This scene truly stunned everyone present. The atmosphere was quiet for a moment, and then immediately became uproar. Did I see it wrong? They just flew over my head? That's a fairy. It's over. That young man flew away. How are we going to explain this to the mistress? So powerful. Some of the candidates fell into a daze when they saw the Shui Diao Getu. Only now did they come back to their senses and involuntarily let out a long sigh. That person's attainments in poetry were truly impressive. After today, the #1 scholar in Qing and prefecture would most likely be someone else. So powerful. Li Xian's eyes were full of envy. If he had this kind of ability in the entire Qing and prefecture, whether it was the daughter of Magistrate Dong or the mistress of official Chen, or even the prostitutes in the brothels who only sold their skills but not their bodies, who wouldn't admire him? So powerful. The 2 plain-clothed bodyguards behind Li Xian looked at each other, their eyes filled with shock. This woman's martial arts were extraordinary, and her Qinggong was even more so. Before this they had never heard of such a person. When had such a person appeared in the martial arts world? As expected, there was always someone better. The martial arts world was vast and there were many capable people. When they returned they had to report to the young master. The young master's guards would probably need to be strengthened. Deep shock appeared on Wan Ruoqing and Zheng Zimo's pretty faces. They didn't think that the woman who had been standing quietly beside them was such a powerful heroine. After a moment, Wan Ruoqing came back to herself and sighed softly. Li is overflowing with talent and rare in this world. Once the Shui Diao Getu appeared, it already stood at the peak of the Mid-Autumn Poetry Festival. If future generations want to surpass it, it will be harder than ascending to the heavens. It will probably be like the immortal of the Magpie Bridge, and be passed down through the ages. Zheng Zimo turned her head and looked at her. She took a small step forward and said with a smile, "Sister Ruoqing is right?" Wan Ruoqing didn't answer. As if she had thought of something, her eyes suddenly looked at the table in front of her. Seeing this, the expression on Zheng Zimo's pretty face changed slightly. She cursed in her heart that it was still discovered by Sister Ruoqing. With quick steps, she quickly put away the original manuscript of Shui Diao Getu, and held it tightly in her arms. All of this happened in a flash. When Wan Ruoqing reacted, Zheng Zimo had already rolled the rice paper into a tube and sat in front of the table. She blinked her big innocent eyes and looked at her with a smile. At this time she had only taken one step. "Zimo, you." Wan Ruoqing's cherry lips opened slightly. Her pretty face was full of surprise as she looked at Zheng Zimo. She was a little speechless. Now that she had it, a sly smile appeared on Zheng Zimo's face. She looked at Wan Ruoqing and said, "Sister Ruoqing, you already have Immortal Magpie Bridge. Why don't you give this Shui Diao Getu to me?" At this time, the top artist of the jadeite courtyard was like a sly little fox. Her face was full of a smile of success. Not far away, Yang Yinzhou's footsteps stopped, and a wry smile appeared on his face. Someone else had actually made the first move. At this time, outside the garden, Li Yi held onto a big tree and closed his eyes. Only then did the dizziness in his mind subside a little. He had never experienced the feeling of a roller coaster in his previous life. After coming to this world, he had experienced it twice. He was extremely curious. As a woman, why did Lu Rui always not take the right path and like to fly around on the wall? After a long time, when the palpitation completely disappeared, Li Yi turned his head and looked at the pretty woman beside him. his eyes were filled with hidden bitterness as he said, "Lu Rui, you will lose me like this. If you can't even endure this little bump, you won't be able to become a second-rate master even if you practice martial arts for the rest of your life." The sword-hugging woman leaned on a book and glanced at him. The reason she gave actually made Li Yi speechless. As she spoke, one of her lily-white hands retracted into her sleeves. Li Yi didn't see the paper raft that she had secretly hidden. Chapter 93. Today, Qing and Prefecture was a city that never sleeps. No matter if it was the taverns, brothels, or other shops, they would all be open all night. This was because the profits from this one night were enough to cover several days of normal business. For a place like the tavern, half a day's profit was almost equivalent to 10 days of normal business. Only an honest person like Old Fong would give himself a break when business was at its peak. At this moment he was probably beating his chest and stamping his feet in regret when he saw the booming business of the other Tonghulu vendors. After coming out of the poetry gathering, Li thought about it carefully and felt some regret. Wasn't it a bit too rash to take out a name like Shuidiao Gedu that could be passed down for 100 generations? Even though he had gotten a jade pendant, that jade pendant could at most be exchanged for 300 taels of silver. Thinking about it, it seemed like he had suffered a loss. Just now, any poem from the selected poems of the Song dynasty would have been enough to subdue Xin Zhao. In the end he had been too impulsive. However, it was too late for regrets now. He didn't think about it anymore. Calming himself down, he picked a pawn shop that looked more proper and walked in. An hour later, Li Yi and Lu Rui walked out of the pawn shop. That Shin guy said that this jade pendant was worth at least 300 taels of silver. The black-hearted owner of the pawn shop actually only offered 150 taels, cutting the price by more than half. Li Yi used 15 minutes to whittle the price down to 200 taels, but the other party refused to budge no matter what. In the end, when Lu Rui's delicate brows furrowed and her jade-like hand had already touched the hilt of her sword, Li Yi saw that the situation was not good and hurriedly brought up Xin Zhao's name. Otherwise this pawn shop owner would be in big trouble tonight. It had to be said that Xin Zhao's name was very useful. Since it was the jade pendant of the second scholar of Qing and Prefecture, the price was naturally higher. After the pawn shop owner confirmed it, he finally increased the price to 300 taels of silver. Before he left, he deliberately stuffed another 10 taels of silver into Li Yi's hand. With a face full of enthusiasm, he expressed that if Li Yi could get Yang Yinzhou's jade pendant the next time, he was willing to pay double the price. If Li Yi was not satisfied, the price could be discussed again. Li Yi could more or less guess the pawnshop owner's intentions. For a talented man like him who was famous throughout Qing and Fu, there must be many women who admired him. Among them, there was no lack of young ladies from rich families who did not lack money. Buying him for 300 taels and then selling him to them, he could probably earn quite a bit of money. Li Yi couldn't help but sigh in his heart. In this world, talents are indeed popular. When he became famous one day he could sell autographs, used socks, unwashed underwear and so on. He could probably make a small fortune. That's right, he seemed to have forgotten to bring the Shuidiao Getu that he had just written. He really shouldn't have. After all, that was the first edition of the manuscript. After he became famous, he would definitely sell it for a few hundred taels of silver. Was it too late to go back and get it now? When he thought of those women who were like wolves and tigers, Li Yi immediately dispelled this thought. With 300 taels of silver in his pocket, Li Yi and Lu Rui were strolling around the busy street. Naturally, he didn't know that the entire Mianxiu garden had already completely boiled over because of that Shuidiao Getu. A few old men with white hair and beards surrounded a table and stared fixedly at the Xian paper on the table. Zheng Zimo stood far away and really wanted to snatch back that Shuidiao Getu manuscript. However, when she remembered that the old men in front of her were all famous figures in the literary world and had extraordinary statuses, she forcibly suppressed this thought. As a scholar, your handwriting is so sloppy. What a disgrace. An old man's hair was standing on end as he spoke angrily. This caused the surrounding scholars to look at each other, but none of them dared to say anything. Although this old man's temper was explosive, the other party's status was there. Even the prefectural magistrate didn't dare to say anything. The old man had been an official for many years and had students all over the world. There was no lack of high-ranking officials among them. Prefectural magistrate Dong was also a disciple of the old man. Now that he saw the old man, he had to respectfully call him teacher. After venting his anger, the old man's gaze once again fell on the paper. However, this time his murky old eyes shone brightly. After a long while he sighed and said, "What a good poem. People have joys and sorrows, the moon has its waxing and waning. I hope that people live long and live together for thousands of miles." To be able to write a mid-autumn festival poem to such a level, I'm afraid there is no one else in the entire Jing kingdom who can do this. This person's attainments in poetry have probably reached an unfathomable level. I heard that the Immortal Magpie Bridge, on Chinese Valentine's Day, was also written by him. Another old man beside him retracted his gaze and sighed as well. One poem is full of amorous feelings, the other is bold and unconstrained, the atmosphere is magnificent. It's hard to imagine that these two completely different poems were written by the same person. From today onwards, as long as the students of the Jing kingdom drink under the moon, they will definitely think of raising a cup to invite the bright moon, the shadows of the three of us. On Chinese Valentine's Day, they will not forget the Immortal Magpie Bridge and Shuidiao Getu. I feel that if he were to compose another Upper Yuan poem, there would be no need for the next few poetry competitions. Just based on poetry alone, even if I were to call him the #1 scholar in the Jing kingdom, there wouldn't be many who would object. The old man nodded his head, expressing his agreement. However, in the next moment he raised his eyebrows and scolded, "This kid, has he never thought of practicing his calligraphy?" The surrounding scholars stood respectfully at the side. Hearing the old man and the other famous figures' evaluation of Li Yi, they couldn't help but be secretly shocked. The #1 scholar in the Jing kingdom. Since ancient times there was no #1 scholar. When one's poetry reached a certain level, it was difficult to distinguish who was better. There had never been a person who received such an evaluation from them. The Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet was closely watched by the scholars of Qing'an Prefecture. Any news would quickly spread. Not long after, a piece of paper floated out of Mianxiu Garden like flying snow. Some busybodies, including the old man's evaluation of the poem, handed it over without the slightest deletion. This included the praise of Li Yi as the #1 scholar in the Jing kingdom. Very quickly the news spread throughout the prefecture. In an extremely short period of time, various brothels were already filled with the tune of Shuidiao Getu. Li Yi of the Immortals of the Magpie Bridge appeared at the Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet. In a rage for a beauty, he brazenly accepted a challenge from the second scholar of Qing'an Prefecture, Shen Zhao. With one Shuidiao Getu, he stunned the audience and actually caused Shen Zhao to tear his poem twice. When the scholars heard this story, it was as if they were there. Their hearts were filled with hot blood and anger, and they only hated themselves for not being there to witness it. When countless women in their chambers heard their maids talk about the news they heard from outside, their beautiful eyes shone with a strange light. At this time Li Yi, who was completely unaware of this, was still wandering the streets. However, it was different from before. Right now there were many more things in the bag on his back. Pouches, perfume pouches, bracelets, hairpins, rouge and face powder. Last time Rui had given him a piece of clothing that she had personally made. Politeness demanded reciprocity. Now that Li Yi's wallet was bulging again, he naturally wouldn't be stingy in this area. However, if he bought it for Rui, Xiaohuan would definitely also want a portion. Otherwise, even if the little maid didn't say it, she would definitely be hurt in her heart. If he bought it for both of them, he couldn't leave out Rui. If he treated Mississippi Lu differently, the consequences would be very serious. Although this would seem insincere, but, at worst, he would just give Rui another gift in the future. Seeing Li Yi once again walk into a jewelry shop, the corners of Lu Rui's mouth curved slightly. Just as she was about to follow him in, her footsteps suddenly paused. Her gaze fell on the two scholars who walked past her on the street. Immortals of the Magpie Bridge. Shuidiao Getu, Minister of Education. That Li Yi, the first scholar of the Jing kingdom. After obtaining this information from the conversation between the two, Lu Rui's pretty brows furrowed. With confusion and surprise, she looked at the back of the figure in the shop who was bargaining with the shop owner. Chapter 94. The liveliness of Qing and Prefectural City would continue for an entire night, but for Li Yi, who had seen even more bustling scenes after the novelty wore off, he no longer had any interest in strolling around. By the time he returned to the stockade village with Lu Rui, it was already late at night. He didn't see Fang and the others. These country bumpkins who had never seen the world would probably only return at dawn. Li Yi asked Lu Rui to bring the gifts he bought for them into the inner courtyard. After returning to his room, he washed up and went to bed. He didn't have Mississippi Lu's stamina. After walking so much and flying around in the sky, he was still full of energy. As he lay on his bed, he thought about a few things. After the Mid-Autumn Festival, he would start selling Rui's necklaces. Before that, he still needed to rent a shop. In addition, it was time to bring forward the matter of the factory. These few days he was really exhausted. After these things were over, he still needed to rest for a while. After thinking about this for a while, his eyelids started to feel heavy. At this time, in the inner courtyard in Lu Rui's room, the two sisters were whispering as usual. Lu Rui's face was filled with surprise and astonishment. Is husband really that amazing? Lu Rui spoke with interest about the expressions on the faces of the scholars in Qing and Prefectural City when Li Yi took out the poem in Mianxiu Garden. Occasionally, she would glance in the direction of the window. Outside the room, the little servant girl carefully stuck to the corner of the window. Tonight, she had changed her hair into a new bun with a new hairpin that the son-in-law had bought for her. She tried her best to stick her ear close to the window. When she heard the whispers coming from inside the room, her beautiful big eyes sparkled and her little face was flushed. She looked extremely adorable. The son-in-law is composing a poem again. The #1 scholar. Is he more amazing than all the other scholars? The little girl thought to herself. When the voices in the room gradually quieted down, she raised her head and glanced outside before tiptoeing away. He had been busy all night yesterday, and it was already very late when he woke up in the morning. In the school, as long as he was not around, Lu Xiaohu would take the initiative to take on the responsibility of being the class leader and teach those brats well. Li Yi felt that he could slack off again today. After running outside, he practiced Tai Chi in the courtyard as usual. Of course, he found the books in the library. Regardless of whether they were useful or not, he just treated it as killing time. The scale of the provincial library was already very large, so naturally there were other martial arts books. However, Li Yi had no intention of learning fighting, sanda, taekwondo, judo, and the like. In this world where everyone was a Super Saiyan, even if he practiced judo and taekwondo to the 100th stage, he would not be able to withstand a few punches from someone like Old Fong. And if he was unlucky and met Lu Rui, the future world boxing champion or mixed martial arts champion could probably be defeated with a single strike from her. After all, no matter how powerful those people were, they were not so powerful that they could fly in the sky. In the library there were many traditional Chinese martial arts such as Tai Chi, Xingyi Quan, Baguazhang, Tongbei Quan, and so on. But those that could be displayed in the library were naturally extremely simple moves. It was impossible to get to the real core. It was fine to practice for fun, but it was completely impossible to become a martial arts master by relying on these. Of course, it was naturally impossible to find peerless secret manuals like 9 Manual, 18 Subduing Dragon Palms, and 6 Pulse Divine Sword in the modern library. Instead of relying on these, it was better to practice the martial arts basics that Lu Rui had thrown to him. Although he had not yet cultivated the so-called true Qi that Rui had mentioned, Li Yi had been learning martial arts for a long time. He estimated that he would have no problem fighting against 3 weak scholars like Xin Zhao. A little further away, Lu Rui stood outside the arched door that connected the two courtyards. Seeing Li Yi doing some strange movements, her beautiful eyes showed some surprise. In the first few days when Li Yi told her that this was a martial art called Tai Chi, Lu Rui did not take it to heart. In martial arts, speed was the key to defeating the slow, and the strong to defeat the weak. It was similar to what he said when he told stories about strange martial arts. In the world of martial arts, there is nothing that cannot be overcome, only speed cannot be overcome. When she heard this, Lu Rui was quite shocked. This summary was really straight to the point. In today's martial arts world, there were many different sects and schools, but they could not escape these words. However, such a sentence that could shock the martial arts world was said by such a scholar. Even grandmasters would be ashamed to hear it. When Lu Rui calmed down these days, she carefully pondered over the few words that he mentioned when he told stories. Unexpectedly, she also realized something and made a small progress in martial arts. Although she still did not break through the shackles and step into the grandmaster realm, it was very rare for her to make such a small progress with her current realm. Therefore, when Li Yi said that Tai Chi was about defeating the strong with the weak, defeating the fast with the slow, and conquering the hard with the soft, Lu Rui just smiled. Defeating the strong with the weak and doing the opposite, how could there be such a wonderful martial art in the world? However, these past few days she had often seen these movements, so she still paid some attention to them. His movements were natural and smooth, extremely coherent, and didn't seem like he was doing it randomly. As Lu Rui watched, she couldn't help but imitate a move. It seemed like something flashed through her mind, but when she thought about it carefully, there was nothing. After Li Yi finished the turning and stroking, he saw Lu Rui's beautiful starting hand, full of beauty. He was stunned for a moment and said, "My wife, do you want to learn Tai Chi? I can teach you." Lu Rui smiled and said, "My husband is busy all day, you don't have to worry about me. I have nothing to do anyway and it is not difficult to learn." Li Yi waved his hand. When he practiced martial arts, he was ordered around by Lu Rui all day, and Lu Rui occasionally came to give him advice. It was not easy to get a chance to reverse. How could he let it go so easily? Tomorrow he would ask Lu Rui if she wanted to learn it. At that time he would definitely make things difficult for her, reprimand her, "Rotten wood cannot be carved," to save some face. "Then I'll have to trouble you, my husband?" Lu Rui smiled slightly. At this moment she was a little curious about this method of borrowing strength to fight strength, and using little effort to achieve a great deal of wealth. After a moment, in the small courtyard, the conversation between the two gradually became more frequent. "This movement is not like this. Tai Chi is in a circle. My wife, try to experience it." "I understand. For this movement you have to raise your hand a little higher." "Yes, that's right." After a moment the topic was changed by Li Yi. "My wife, your martial arts are so powerful. Have you heard of the Enlightenment method?" "What is Enlightenment method?" "It is a martial arts master who, through a certain secret method, imparts his lifelong skills to another person, and the person who has imparted his skills will instantly become a peerless master." "My husband, you must be joking again. Skills are not goods, how can they be imparted?" "My husband, you must have seen it in those strange novels again, right?" "Ah, there is no such method." Li Yi's voice sounded a little disappointed. Another hope of becoming a martial arts master was dashed again. Chapter 95. As for Lu Rui's speed of learning Tai Chi, Li Yi already didn't know what words to use to describe it. It was because he had a heaven-defying cheating device that he was able to master it in a very short period of time. However, Lu Rui only needed to be taught twice and corrected a few movements before she was able to execute a near-standard Taiji fist. Although there were still some flaws, she was beautiful and tall. More importantly, she had a strong martial arts foundation. The movements she executed were much better than Li Yi's. This made Li Yi, who was standing at the side, sigh in his heart. These movements were indeed different when done by a woman. Whether it was practical or not, at least it looked extremely pleasing to the eye. Not long after, there was a knock on the door, which made Li Yi unable to enjoy it so peacefully. It didn't sound like Fong. The way he knocked on the door was much rougher than this. It also wasn't Lu Rui. When Second Miss came back, she never had to go through the trouble of knocking on the door. She could just fly in from outside. Li Yi walked over and opened the door. He saw two middle-aged men standing behind the door, their faces full of smiles. Seeing the two men, Li Yi was stunned for a moment. They looked familiar. He thought that he had seen them before. After thinking carefully, he remembered that it was last night. The two of them sent some eggs and mooncakes, and then he sent Xiao Huan away. As for their identity, it seemed that they were one of Lu's sister Rui's uncles. They belonged to the direct line of descent. Ever since the Lu clan settled down here, the two girls had quite a few uncles after a few generations of inheritance. It had to be said that the Lu family's ability to produce sons was not just for show. It was said that Lu Rui's grandfather had 5 brothers, and the 5 of them each had their own children, giving birth to a bunch of sons. They were Lu Rui and her sister's uncles. On the other hand, the direct line of descent was only passed down from Lu Rui's father's line. There were only 2 girls in the next generation. 4th uncle, 7th uncle, what's the matter? Although Lu Rui had never gotten along with these people, as juniors she still had the necessary etiquette. Lu Rui walked over and bowed to the 2 of them. Let's talk inside, let's talk inside." Seeing that Li Yi and Lu Rui didn't seem to want to invite them in, the 2 of them laughed dryly. "May I know why 4th uncle and 7th uncle have come this time?" After a while, Lu Rui looked at the 2 of them and asked again. Most of these uncles weren't on good terms with her and her sister. Yesterday, the 2 of them had eagerly sent gifts over, which had already made her extremely surprised. Now that he had come to visit again, it seemed that he really did have something important to do. The 2 of them looked hesitant, but their eyes flashed with determination. They took out a few pieces of yellowed paper and placed them on the table in front of them. "4th uncle, what do you mean?" Lu Rui looked at the things on the table and turned to look at him. Finally, a trace of doubt appeared in her beautiful eyes. When her father was still alive, the village was one, but when he had an accident, those uncles immediately wanted to separate from the family. The two sisters were still young at that time, and almost all the things that belonged to them were taken away. At that time the other party didn't give them any face at all. Why did their temperament change now? The middle-aged man on the left said, "Rui, what happened in the past was our fault. When we separated from the family, these land deeds should have belonged to you and Rui. You should accept them." Fourth uncle, what do you want to say? Just say it. Of course, Lu Rui wouldn't think that they suddenly found their conscience and wanted to return the things that they had taken away. There must be a bigger plot for them to act like this. The middle-aged man hesitated for a while and said again, "Since Rui said so, I'll say it directly. You know, these 2 years have not been good and life at home has been really hard. In a few days I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to even eat. Look, the sugar-coated haws made by the son-in-law are so popular. Can we? At this point, the middle-aged man's meaning was already very clear. Although the sugar-coated haws business was good, people only recognized the loose sugar-coated haws sold by Fong and the others. The business of other vendors was still bleak and pitiful. If they also wanted to make a fortune by selling sugar-coated haws, even if they got the secret recipe without their consent, they couldn't use the name of the loose, and the profit would still be pitiful. If they could get their consent and start the sugar-coated haws business, then this land wouldn't be much at all. The land in the stockade wasn't considered good farmland to begin with. When the year was good, the production could more or less meet the needs of life. If it was a disaster year like last year, there was almost no harvest for the whole year, then what was the use of the land? If they had known that Rui would be able to snatch such a son-in-law in a few years, there would have been no separation of the family that year. They would have desperately fawned on the two sisters if they could. "Husband, you decide on this matter." Lu Rui didn't answer them. She turned her head and said to Li Yi. Regarding the sugar-coated haws, he had been the one doing it from beginning to end. Lu Rui had never asked, so naturally she wouldn't make the decision for him at this time. In fact, Li Yi had already roughly understood the intentions of Lu Rui's uncles last night. The status of the Lu sugar-coated haws in Qing and prefectural city was roughly equivalent to the old Beijing sugar-coated haws of later generations. It was a time-honored brand with guaranteed quality. They were only after this name. He turned to look at the two and smiled. "Fourth uncle. Seventh uncle, right?" The two knew in their hearts that whether or not they could succeed today depended on the scholar in front of them. They hurriedly responded, and the smile on their faces became even more amiable. Li Yi's expression was hesitant. He revealed a thoughtful expression and said, "It's not impossible for you to use the Lu's name to sell sugar-coated haws, but what?" The two immediately asked. "But you can only do it in the form of an alliance," Li Yi said, looking at them. "What do you mean by an alliance?" The two looked at each other and asked Li Yi in confusion. Even Lu Rui's beautiful eyes showed a trace of doubt. It was clearly the first time she had heard of such a term. The meaning of an alliance is very simple. "We can agree to let you use the Lu's name to sell sugar-coated haws, but we will take half of the daily profits," Li Yi said, looking at them. The Lu's sugar-coated haws name was not so easy to spread. It was not very realistic to ask them to fork out a large sum of money in advance. Explaining the concept of an alliance to them in the future was also like playing the lute to a cow. They could only use this simple and crude method. 50%. The two of them exclaimed at the same time. This number for them was a little too much to bear. No one would be willing to give half of the hard-earned money to someone else. "Son-in-law, isn't 50% a little too much?" Fourth uncle of the Lu's looked at Li Yi and asked with some difficulty. Li Yi smiled without saying anything, indicating that there was no room for discussion on this matter. "After bullying my wife and sister-in-law for so many years, it was time to pay back some interest. Let us think about this matter." Li Yi smiled as he watched the two of them walk out the door, waiting patiently. After a moment the two of them walked back in. Fourth uncle thought for a moment, then said, 50% is really a little too much. We'll go back and think about it. I'll give you an answer tomorrow." He was obviously extremely unwilling to give half of the profits to others. After the discussion between the two of them just now, when they went back they would join forces with the other direct family members to put pressure on them. It would be best if they could waive the alliance fee, but if that was not possible, it was not impossible to reduce it to half. After saying that he turned around and walked out the door. "Rui, son-in-law, without your agreement, I won't be able to earn even 50%. 50%, then 50%. I agree." Fourth uncle of the Lu's had one foot out the door when he heard the familiar voice of seventh uncle behind him. Bang! Fourth uncle of the Lu's tripped on the door sill, and his body flew forward half a foot before landing heavily on the ground, stirring up a cloud of dust. Fourth uncle, why are you so polite? Not too far away from him, old Fong was standing there, looking at the scene before him with a look of astonishment on his face. Chapter 96. Fourth Uncle Lu left quickly and returned quickly as well. The fall on the doorstep seemed to have made him think things through. He climbed up and patted the dust off his body as if nothing had happened. He readily agreed. He had already thought it through. He was also willing to pay the 50% of the joining fee. Of course, how the other person secretly cursed seventh uncle for being a treacherous pig-like teammate was not something that Li Yi cared about. The candied Ha's business wasn't big, but it wasn't small either. Fong and the others had more important things to do, so they naturally couldn't spend all their time on this. They urgently lacked manpower. This was the first problem they had to face if they wanted to expand the candied Ha's business. The demand for the Lu family's candied Ha's in Qing and prefectural city was far from being saturated. There was still a lot of profit to be made. Of course, Li Yi couldn't just give this portion of the profit to the Lu family's direct descendants. It wasn't impossible for them to interfere, but if he didn't peel off a few layers of skin from them, how could he be worthy of the care these people had given the Lu sisters all these years? Son-in-law, do you really plan on letting them do the candied Ha's business? Fong walked in from outside and looked at Li Yi with a face full of confusion. For Fong, this was currently the only profitable business. Naturally, he wasn't willing to let the direct descendants take advantage of it for nothing. He had personally witnessed how these people treated the two ladies these past few years. Fong didn't even want to give them 10% of the profit, let alone 50%. You have to look at the long term. Just think of it as them making money for us. Li Yi could only think of another way to explain things to Fong, who only knew how to look at things in front of him. Although it wasn't easy for Fong's brain to work around things, his intelligence was still within the range of a normal person. After hearing Li Yi's explanation, he somewhat understood. Just letting them borrow the Lu family's candied Ha's name and they could get 50% of the profit for nothing. Thinking about it this way, it didn't seem like a loss. Thinking of this, Fong's face showed his signature silly smile. Looking at the silly smile on Fong's face, Li Yi couldn't help but think of the scene last night when this guy tricked him. He resisted the urge to take off his shoes and slap his face. He smiled and said, "Don't smile like an idiot. Come in, I have something to tell you." For some reason, Fong's heart trembled when he saw the smile on Li Yi's face. He suddenly had a bad premonition. After an hour, Fong walked out of the courtyard with a worried look on his face. He looked back at the house and let out a long sigh. The son-in-law actually handed the task of building a workshop to him and wanted it to be completed within 5 days. If he did it well, there would be no reward. If he didn't do it well, his bonus of half a month of candied Ha's would be deducted. Fong was extremely suspicious in his heart. This was definitely the son-in-law's revenge for what he did last night. He didn't want to take this hot potato, but he thought that if he didn't let the son-in-law vent his anger, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to sleep well every night. Sooner or later there would be a knife. This time, it was better to take it happily. If he had known that retribution would come so quickly last night, alas, he regretted it so much. He sighed all the way back and saw a figure pacing back and forth in front of the door from a distance. It was a thin man pacing back and forth while rubbing his hands. From time to time he glanced into the courtyard, but he didn't take a step in. "Yang Xiaojun, what are you doing here?" Fong walked over with large strides and looked at the man. His face turned cold as he asked coldly, "Fong, I..." The man suddenly heard a voice behind him and turned to look at Fong. A trace of shame appeared on his face. After a long time, he opened his mouth and said with some difficulty, I came to borrow some food from you. There hasn't been any food at home for 2 days. It doesn't matter if I don't have enough to eat, but the child..." Fong's face was rarely gloomy. There was an irrepressible anger in his eyes as he looked at the man. When Rui's father was still alive, this man was like himself and the others. He was also by the side of the direct line of descent. They grew up together and were considered the closest brothers. However, ever since the old stockade master left, only Fong and a few others stayed. The man and most of the others chose to get close to the direct line of descent. From then on, Fong and him did not have any contact. Even when they met in the stockade and the man wanted to greet him, Fong would just coldly walk past him. Being betrayed by his best brother was a knot that had been stuck in Fong's heart for all these years. "I've let you two ladies down for what happened back then. I've let you down. You can beat me up, but I'm begging you to lend me some food. Otherwise, the child will really starve to death. The shame on the man's face deepened. He was a famous man. Even if he had to starve to death, he wouldn't have been able to lower himself to look for Fang. However, there was still a child at home who hadn't eaten for 2 days. Fang's expression was still cold. Even though he knew that the man had been driven into a corner and had no choice but to leave in order to feed his family, there was always a thorn in his heart. Even now he could not forgive him. Seeing that Fang did not speak for a long time, a hint of defeat finally appeared on the man's face. A look of despair appeared in his eyes as he turned around and walked away without saying a word. He would rather starve to death than beg for help. This was indeed his limit. After taking 2 steps, an angry shout came from behind him. "Yang Xiaojun, you mother***, stop right there." Turning his head, a huge fist came flying at him and smashed fiercely into his face. At the same time Fang's furious voice came, "You ****, I've wanted to beat you up for a long time." After being punched in the face, the man immediately felt dizzy and saw stars. He was also angered and returned a punch as he cursed, "Come on, I'm not afraid of you." Old Fang hadn't expected his opponent to fight back, and was caught off guard. The fist landed on his face, causing his eyes to swell like a panda's. Cursing angrily, he punched back and began to wrestle with the man. The two of them punched and kicked each other. After all, the man's physique was much inferior to Fang's. Although he was not suppressed and beaten, he was still the one at a disadvantage. After being kicked to the ground by Fang for an unknown number of times, he lay there panting and was unwilling to get up again. "The last time I beat you up so happily was probably more than 10 years ago, right?" Old Fang wiped the sweat off his forehead. Although his face was covered in bruises, there was a comfortable expression on his face. "Yes, it's been more than 10 years. The man looked up at the sky as a trace of reminiscence appeared on his face. The reminiscence flashed on Fang's face, and then he kicked the man and said coldly, "If you're not dead, come in with me." After a while, Fang stuffed a large bag of refined rice into the man's hand and scolded, "This food is for my nephew. It has nothing to do with you, Yang Xiaojun." Fang. The bag of rice seemed to be at least a dozen kilograms. A trace of emotion appeared on the man's face. Just as he was about to speak, he was interrupted by Fang with a wave of his hand. "These days the son-in-law is going to build a workshop. If you have nothing to do, come and work with me. You'll get 10 copper coins a day and you'll eat your fill. Don't say that I, Fang, treat you badly." Fang punched him in the chest and said, "And those bastards, if they're willing to come and work with me, let them come." "Thank you." The man was stunned when he heard the words, and then his face showed ecstasy. He only said half a sentence and Fang waved his hand and said, "Okay, go home quickly. Don't let your mother-in-law wait. If you're willing to work, come and find me after dinner." "Son-in-law, I found everyone." Li Yi was planning how the floral water workshop should be built in the room. Fang pushed the door and said at the top of his voice, "So fast, hiss you are." Li Yi raised his head and looked at Fang's bruised and swollen face. He took a breath and couldn't help but ask, "Did you really go to a brothel last night and was discovered by your mother-in-law today?" Chapter 97. Li did not doubt whether Fang had visited the brothel last night. It was not because he believed in his character but because he did not have that much money. Although the candied Ha's business brought in money every day with Fang's current savings, it was not enough for him to visit a brothel. That kind of brothel was a place where the rich went. Fang's wife was in charge of the money, and it was good enough that she could give him a few dozen copper coins as pocket money. If he went to that kind of place, he might not even be able to afford the cheapest girl. However, although Fang looked a little embarrassed, he seemed to be in a good mood, so Li did not continue to ask. If this was the daily hobby of the couple in the bedroom, it would be a little awkward for an outsider to ask. The construction of the workshop was left to Fang and the others. These men were all experts in many aspects. They were good at farming, herding horses, building walls, and fighting. Except for some things that needed to be told in advance, Li did not need to worry about it. As for the location of the workshop, after a round of inspection by Li Yi and Fang, they had more or less decided on it. Considering safety and confidentiality, of course, the workshop could not be built in the stockade village. Using the distillation method to purify alcohol required open fire, and alcohol was flammable. If something happened and the stockade village was set on fire, it would be very lively. Of course, confidentiality was also a big part of the reason. Whether it was the production of ruidu or the distillation of alcohol, there was not much technical difficulty. If the confidentiality was not done well and someone learned it secretly and spread it, then naturally, these two things could not be used to make money. Considering the transportation, water source and many other factors, the location of the workshop was finally chosen to be outside the stockade village, next to a stream near the back mountain. The stream was not big and there had never been a mountain flood for decades. It was convenient to get water and it was very safe. He gave the finished drawing to Fong. He only needed to go and look at it every day and he did not need to worry about other things. As a man who majored in engineering, although he did not specialize in civil engineering or architecture, things like drawing couldn't be more simple for Li Yi. The blueprint of the workshop was based on the workshop of the future. Only some minor changes were made according to the actual situation. There were only a few drawings, some flat, some three-dimensional and some simple lines, but they clearly expressed the structure of the workshop. It was clear at a glance. Fong and the others only needed to build according to the drawings. Of course, before that, he had to first rent a shop in the prefecture city. Originally, he had only planned to rent a normal shop, but after winning against Xinjiao yesterday, he had gained 300 taels of liquid capital, so he had to change his plans. 300 taels of silver was enough to rent a shop with a good location in a bustling area. Originally, he planned to go down the mountain to rent a shop and renovate it over the next few days. Then he would take out some Rui nectar to test the market. After the workshop was built, he would be able to mass-produce it. However, changes often came a little faster than planned. Many people in the village were eyeing the candied Ha's business. In the past, it was not easy for the direct descendants of the Liu family to ask for it. Of course, they also knew that even if they asked for it, Fang Laosan and the others would not agree. However, the success of Fang Laosan and Fang Laosan made them widen their eyes. Just by handing over 2 land deeds, they could sell candied Ha's in the name of the Liu family. Although the joining fee of 50% made their hearts ache when they thought about it, as long as they could succeed in the candied Ha's business, even if they had to hand over 50% of the profits, they could still live a much better life than what they had now. No matter how they looked at it, it was a good deal. Land was the foundation of a family. Under normal circumstances, they would not easily hand over the land. However, how much food could the land produce in a year? Usually it was fine and the family could always eat their fill. If the harvest was bad one year, the whole family would have to tighten their waistbands to live. Looking at Fang Laosan and the others, they had only been with Rui's son-in-law for a short time. What kind of life were they living now? How could the direct descendants feel at ease? As a result, in the past 2 days, Li Yi's house was almost trampled to the ground by these people. Land deeds joining fee. They had already gotten the information they wanted from Fang Laosan and Fang Laosan. These people were very straightforward. They slapped the land deeds on the table one by one. Before Li Yi mentioned the joining fee, they took the initiative to make an agreement. 50% was 50%. Everyone would get 50% and no one would lose out. From the beginning to the end, these uncles' attitudes were very humble. The smiles on their faces were as kind as they could be. After all, no one wanted to go against money. What kind of life they would lead in the future was completely up to Li Yi's decision. Lu Rui did not ask about what Li Yi had done. She only silently put away the land deeds that Li Yi had handed over to her. However, Xiao Huan's pretty face was full of smiles these days. After being bullied for a long time by those people, she was very happy to see them talking to the son-in-law with a smile. To be honest, Li Yi was not interested in the land. In this era, as long as one wanted money, it was a very simple thing to buy land. Moreover, the land here was not like the land in the future, where the right to use it was only for a few decades. Even if the dynasty changed and the dynasty changed, it would only recognize the deed and not the owner. If it was your land, it would be your land. In order to maintain stability, the ruler would not take back the land. As long as you had the land deed, you were still the owner of the land and no one could take it away. The barren land of Willow Leaves village was really not attractive to Li Yi. He just wanted to take back what should belong to them. The real reason why he asked the direct descendants of Lus to intervene in the business of candied Ha's was that Fang and the others should always leave some soup for others to drink. Under his wise leadership, Fang and the others would only get better and better in the future. Even if Fang wanted to live in a big house and marry a concubine, it was not impossible. There was no harm if there was no comparison. A few people were living a well-off life, but most people in the village were still hovering above the line of food and clothing. The gap between the rich and the poor was so big. If it went on like this, there would be trouble sooner or later. But now, such a hidden danger had been extinguished by Li Yi before it even had a chance to show itself. Of course, It only solved the problem of the direct descendants of Luz. After all, most of the people in the village were the former bandits like Fong and the others. Their lives were even more difficult. However, for these people, being able to fill the stomachs of their families was already the greatest satisfaction they could get. This request was not too high. Even if Li Yi did not mention it, old Fong and the others would also think of helping out on a daily basis, so there would not be any major problems. Chapter 98. Brother, may I know where the nearest broker house is? On the busy street of Qing'an Prefecture, the handsome scholar stopped a passing man. He cupped his hands in obeisance and said with a smile. The man cupped his hands in obeisance and said with a smile, "Go straight ahead for about half a mile, cross a street and then turn left. After crossing 2 streets you will see a marketplace." "Is the broker house in the marketplace?" The handsome scholar looked at him and asked. No. There are many people in the marketplace. Brother, you can ask someone there. Someone should know where the broker house is." The man smiled and turned away with a calm face. Haha. Looking at the back of the man leaving, Li Yi forced a smile on his face and felt like thousands of horses were galloping in his heart. He was not in a hurry to ask the broker. He was a little tired after walking all the way down the mountain. He rested for a while at a tea stall on the side of the street, wondering if he should buy a carriage. The distance between Willow Leaf Village and Qing and Prefectural City was more than 20 miles. If he only relied on walking, it would take him more than 2 hours to get there. However, it seemed that it was useless to buy a carriage. Some mountain roads were rugged and inconvenient, so a carriage couldn't pass. No wonder Willow Village was so poor before he came. They didn't even understand the principle of, to get rich, build roads first. They guarded a few acres of barren land and lived in isolation for decades. It would be strange if they could get rich. After drinking a cup of tea to quench his thirst, he asked the tea stall owner. He didn't expect that the owner really knew where the broker house was and enthusiastically pointed out the direction for Li Yi. The broker house in this era was equivalent to the 58 cities in the future. Renting houses, buying and selling maids and servants were all within the scope of the business of the broker house. In the broker house, there was no need to worry about encountering illegal agents, because all the brokers were registered by the government and had a certificate. Once someone complained about them, they would be sued. According to the tea stall owner's guidance, Li Yi soon found the broker house. As soon as he entered the gate, several people surrounded him. "Master, do you want to rent a house or buy maids?" "Master, I grew up in the prefecture and am very familiar with this place. No matter what you want, I'm sure you will be satisfied." "Master?" The guys in the broker house were all very enthusiastic. This scene was a little similar to the time when Li Xian took him to the brothel last time. However, it was no wonder that they were so enthusiastic. In this line of work, how much they earned depended entirely on their performance. If a customer wanted to inquire about something here, they had to pay a certain fee. Their wages came from this fee, and the more customers they attracted, the more their commission would naturally be. If they met a generous person, as long as the customer was satisfied, they would naturally reward them with money. The young master in front of them looked extraordinary, so he must be a big customer. These middlemen had dealt with all kinds of people all year round, so they were quite good at judging people. Li Yi casually picked a smart-looking guy. The others couldn't help but show disappointment on their faces, but they could only retreat helplessly. "Young master, what do you need? Don't hesitate to tell me. I will definitely satisfy you." The waiter rubbed his hands together and said with a smile. "I need to rent a shop in the prefecture, a moderate size, preferably in a bustling area. How about the rent here?" Li Yi didn't beat around the bush and said straightforwardly. The waiter was obviously very familiar with this. He said without thinking, "If it's in an ordinary area, the rent of an ordinary shop is about 100 taels. If you want to rent a shop in a bustling area, I'm afraid it will cost at least 300 taels of silver." This price was not much different from what Li Yi had expected. However, 300 taels of silver was not a small number after all. After the shop was rented, it would definitely need to be renovated, which would cost at least dozens of taels of silver. In this way, there would not be enough money to buy the raw materials for making ruidu. 300 taels of silver is a little expensive. Li Yi smiled, took out a piece of broken silver from his arms, and put it on the table in front of the waiter. The broken silver was at least 1 tael. Seeing this, the waiter's eyes suddenly lit up. He swept his sleeve across the table and the silver disappeared. When he looked at Li Yi again, the smile on his face became even more radiant. "Young master, you have found the right person this time. I just happen to know of a shop in a bustling area that is urgently for sale. The price is about 20% lower than the market price. If young master is interested, I will take you there immediately. Reality proved that money could make the devil turn millstones. This saying had been used since ancient times. Most things in the world could be solved with money. If it couldn't, then it meant that the money you gave was not enough. One tael of silver was enough to make the waiter's attitude become extremely enthusiastic. He immediately took Li Yi to see the shop. The location of the shop was not bad. It was on the main street of the Qing and prefecture. Outside was the busy street. The shop was about 3 feet long and 6 feet wide. It could be considered spacious. More importantly, there was a small courtyard and 2 rooms at the back of the shop. According to the waiter, the family that originally did business here moved to the capital after their business became big, and the shop was left empty. However, this shop was located in the bustling area of the prefecture. If it was left empty, it would be too much of a waste. Therefore, they asked the broker to rent it out for them. Because they left in a hurry, the rent was much lower. As for the courtyard and rooms at the back of the shop, they were also given to them for free. After looking at the shop and the courtyard behind it, Li Yi started to feel uneasy. To be able to rent such a place for less than 300 taels of silver, it was almost no different from a pie falling from the sky. He looked at the waiter with some suspicion and asked, "Tell me honestly, is there something wrong with this shop? Was there a murder case, or was there a ghost?" Hearing this, the waiter was stunned at first, and then he said with a bitter smile, "Young master, you have wronged me. Everything I said is true without any concealment. If you don't believe me, you can ask around." At this moment, the waiter felt bitter in his heart. 1 tael of silver was almost equivalent to a month's salary. If it wasn't for the fact that this young master had been so generous, he definitely wouldn't have mentioned such a good thing so easily. Forget it, forget it. Li Yi waved his hand. If there was really a problem here, the broker would not take such a hot potato. Moreover, one should be upright and not suspect others for no reason. At this time, a stout fat man came out from the cloth shop next door. Seeing this, Li Yi hurried to go up. "May I know your name? Are you the shopkeeper of this cloth shop?" The fat man nodded and looked at Li Yi with doubt. "My surname is Su. What can I do for you?" "Shopkeeper Su has been here for a long time. Have you heard that the shop next door is haunted?" The waiter just walked out of the shop and heard this. He couldn't help but stagger and almost fell. Chapter 99. Looking at the pale face of the fat man in front of him and the cold sweat on his forehead, it was obvious that he was not very brave. Li Yi more or less understood what was going on. The shop was definitely not haunted. Otherwise, the fat man would have moved out a long time ago. Since that was the case, he still had to take advantage of the situation. 250 taels of silver to rent a shop like this and a small villa with a courtyard in the first ring of Qing and prefectural city. It was really a good deal. He immediately signed a contract with the middleman. The lease period was 1 year, and he readily took out 3 silver notes, each worth 100 taels of silver. Seeing this, the waiter's face was filled with ecstasy. His previous unhappiness had long been forgotten beyond the highest heavens. 250 taels of silver. Just the commission alone was enough for him to earn a few months' salary. However, when it was time to pay, the young master insisted on giving him 250 taels of silver and 1 copper coin. This made the shop assistant puzzled for a long time. Of course, perhaps this was the rich young master's hobby. This was not important to him. One handed over the money and the other handed over the goods. After an hour, Li Yi held the contract with the red seal of the government. He looked at the shop in front of him with satisfaction. For the next 1 year, the right to use this shop belonged to him. This was only a small step in his plan to make money. It was a big step out of the Willow Leaf village and into the prefectural city. Little brother, you just said, this shop is haunted. Is it true?" The fat shopkeeper leaned against the door of the cloth shop next door. He looked at Li Yi with a pale face and asked, "It's just a joke. Shopkeeper Su, don't take it seriously." Li Yi gave him a kind smile and turned to walk into the shop. Phew! The fat shopkeeper let out a long sigh of relief. His body slowly slid down from the door of the shop and collapsed on the ground. He raised his head and looked at Li Yi with eyes full of resentment. The matter of renting the shop was much smoother than Li Yi had imagined. He was also very satisfied with this shop. Of course, even though it was rented, it couldn't be put into use immediately. At the very least, it needed to be renovated carefully. As for how to decorate it, Li Yi hadn't thought about it yet. Moreover, Fong and the others were busy building the workshop recently, so he had to wait until they finished their work. After renting the shop, Li was not in a hurry to go back. He closed the shop door and locked it. He strolled around the streets around the shop to familiarize himself with the environment. Speaking of which, the middleman was quite reliable. This area was almost at the center of Qing and prefectural city. It was extremely prosperous, with rows upon rows of shops. Restaurants and brothels could be seen in just a few steps. Not far from the shops was a market square. People came and went and it was very lively. Li also noticed that there was a brothel next to the shop. To put it bluntly, it was a modern theater. In this era without mobile phones, television, movies, and the internet, scholars strolled around the brothel and recited poems. This was the most common form of entertainment. As for ordinary people, they could only listen to storytelling and plays. The brothel was the main performance venue for these entertainment programs. In the future, if he was bored, he could often go there to sit, drink a cup of tea and listen to a few tunes to kill time. This was not a bad idea. Of course, the current him didn't have the leisure to do so. Brother Lu, look, isn't that the person from that day? When Li passed by a brothel, 3 young men happened to walk out. One of them raised his head and looked at the figure in front of him. His expression was startled. Then he immediately pointed at him and said to the person beside him, "Yes, Brother Lu, isn't that the person who insulted Fong Wentian and made Brother Lu lose face?" The person beside him looked in the direction he was pointing and exclaimed, "It's him." The man who was called Brother Lu looked at the young scholar who walked past them and his face couldn't help but turn gloomy. That day at the poetry meet, he had taken a liking to the other's servant girl. What could he do? The other was unwilling to exchange and completely disregarded him, the son of the county magistrate. Although with his vengeful personality, he would not let this matter go. There were so many people present that day. No matter how angry he was, he couldn't do anything. At the mid-autumn poetry meet, he heard that the person had written some good poems that even Xin Zhao had to concede defeat. These days, the popularity of the person seemed to surpass Yang Yanzhou and become the #1 scholar in Qinghai Prefecture. He had a grudge against him, so naturally he was extremely unhappy. Later, although he had investigated him, he didn't find anything. He guessed that the other had no background and wanted revenge. Unfortunately, he couldn't find the person. After a few days, he had almost forgotten about this matter. Who would have thought that he would run into him here today? Follow them. The youth surnamed Lu said coldly and quickly followed them. This was a rare opportunity. If he let the other escape this time, he didn't know when he would meet him again. Although the safest method was to find some people first, there was clearly no time for that. Furthermore, the other was only one person. They had 3 people and had the advantage in numbers, so they were not afraid of him. The 2 people beside him looked at each other. There was a trace of hesitation in their eyes, but they still followed. At the same time, Li Yi, who was walking on the street, suddenly frowned and his footsteps slowed down. It was not good to make a move in the busy streets. The 3 people quickly stopped and pretended to look around. A wastrel and 2 scholars. Their tracking skills were really clumsy and their acting was terrible. No matter what, Li Yi had been taught by the 2 heroines. Very quickly he felt that someone was following him. He turned his head to look. The exaggerated acting skills of the 3 people were especially eye-catching in the crowd. A trace of a smile appeared on his lips. His footsteps quickened and he walked forward with large strides. Seeing this, the 3 people hurriedly chased after him. This time he didn't choose a place with many people. After a few turns, he walked into a deserted alley. When the youth surnamed Lu saw this, a trace of joy appeared on his face. He was worried about where to make a move. He didn't expect that the other party would take the initiative to walk to such a place. He gave the 2 people beside him a look and they nodded. Their figures suddenly rushed out and blocked in front of Li Yi. "What do you want?" Hearing the scholar's panicked voice, a trace of joy appeared on the youth surnamed Lu's face. He said, "What are you waiting for? Make a move. In broad daylight you actually dare to hit people?" The scholar's voice seemed to be even more panicked. The youth surnamed Lu walked to the front and sneered at Li Yi. He said, "So what if I hit you? Did anyone see it?" When the youth surnamed Lu said this, the 3 people saw the scholar's expression freeze for a moment. After looking around, a trace of a smile actually appeared on his face. Chapter 100. In broad daylight, deep alleyways with few people in sight, he looked at the 3 people surrounding him. Their faces were dark, their footsteps were unsteady, and their legs were unsteady. One look and he could tell that their bodies had been emptied by alcohol and women. He had the right time, the right place, and the right people. Moreover, no matter what, he was still the disciple of these two peerless heroines. As a young hero of the martial arts world, if he couldn't even deal with these three small fries, how would he have the face to learn martial arts from them in the future? He wouldn't even be able to dream of becoming a lowly martial artist in the martial arts world. If Lu Rui were to find out, he would laugh himself to death. You can still smile when you're at death's door. Seeing the smile on the scholar's face, the youth surnamed Lu felt insulted and rushed forward with his fist. Of course he was only saying it casually. If someone really died, even if his father was the county magistrate of Anxi, he wouldn't be able to protect him. The two scholars beside him hesitated for a moment when they saw him making a move, but they still dashed forward as well. Although scholars weren't good at fighting, the county magistrate's son had already stepped forward. If they still stood here, they wouldn't have a good time afterward. The three people rushed over aggressively, but Li Yi wasn't afraid at all. Instead, his eyes flashed with excitement. Although he knew that his skills had improved a lot over the past few days, he had never really fought with anyone. Challenging Rui to spar was simply courting death. As for challenging Fong, that fellow didn't know how to control his strength. Li Yi wasn't at ease. At this moment he finally had a chance to put his plan into practice. He dodged the youth surnamed Lu's punch and swung his elbow at the youth's back. Bam! The youth surnamed Lu didn't expect this scholar to be so agile. Caught off guard, he took a heavy blow to his back and staggered. Before he could turn his head, Li Yi had already kicked his buttocks. Thump. Although he didn't kick someone far away like Fong and the others, he still made him lose his balance and fall to the ground. At this moment, the two scholars had already rushed over. Li Yi turned his head and a smile appeared on his face. He faced them fearlessly. After a while. Don't come over. Including the youth surnamed Lu, the three with bruised and swollen faces looked at the scholar who was slowly walking towards them with a trembling voice. Li Yi rubbed his slightly aching fist. The effect of force was mutual. He was not like Lu Rui who had the protection of true chi. His fist was also aching after beating up these three guys. However, even though his fist was a little painful, his heart was filled with lofty sentiments as he looked at the three people in front of him. No wonder everyone said that he was a weak scholar. If the fighting strength of all the scholars in the world was so weak, then he alone could take on a group of them. The only troublesome thing was that the guy in the lead seemed to be the son of the county magistrate. It didn't seem good to beat him up. After all, Li Yi would probably have to stay in the prefecture for a long time in the future. It wasn't a wise thing to make enemies with this kind of person. However, since the enmity had already been formed, it was useless to regret it now. If there was no other way, he could only look for Li Xian and give him 2 poems to deceive little girls. Based on his character, he would probably agree immediately. Are you done fighting? Just as Li Yi was planning to do so, a faint voice came from behind him. The voice was crisp and pleasant to the ear. Li Yi turned his head and saw a woman leaning against the wall at the entrance of the alley. She was wearing the uniform of a constable and was looking at him with a teasing gaze. The woman was extremely beautiful with an exquisite figure and a valiant and heroic bearing. It was just that the uniform of a constable was a little out of place, causing Li Yi to feel a little uneasy. However, when he saw that it was only one person and a woman at that, he finally felt relieved. I'm done fighting? Li Yi nodded and looked for an opportunity to escape. Since you're done fighting, follow me back to the yamen. The woman straightened her body and said calmly as she slowly walked toward him. Constable Li, hurry up and catch him. How dare you hit me? You're dead meat. The appearance of the woman caused the fear on the young man's face to disappear instantly. He immediately pointed at her and said. At this moment, the way he looked at Li Yi became ferocious again. Once they reached the yamen, it would be his territory. Although his father had explicitly forbidden him from using his identity as the son of the county magistrate to bully others, none of the constables dared to disrespect him. Once they reached the yamen, all he needed to do was say the word and this guy would be in for a beating. The woman walked in front of the three and said calmly, "The 3 of you follow me back." What? The young man was stunned and asked in disbelief, "You want to catch us too? Fighting in the street, why don't you catch us?" Looking at her expressionless words, the young man was stunned for a moment. Then, his face was filled with grief and indignation. How did they fight? They were obviously being beaten. Didn't they see that they were the ones being beaten? Are you blind? Is there any law? Of course, he would not dare to ask such a question even if he was given 10 guts. After all, Although the woman in front of him was only a constable in the yamen, which constable would talk to the county magistrate with caution. As early as the first day he came to the yamen, his father had repeatedly warned him that he could offend anyone in the yamen, except for this madam. If it were any other constable, he would have already scolded them. But at this moment he could only endure the grievance in his heart. His eyes inadvertently glanced around and saw that the scholar who beat them just now was about to slip out of the alley. His expression immediately changed and he pointed at him. "He's running away." When the female constable turned around, she saw the figure of the scholar just now disappear from the alley. The corner of her mouth curled up slightly. After taking a big detour, Li could not help but sigh in his heart when he reached the street again. The constables here were really competent. Every time something happened they could arrive in time. If the efficiency of the police in the future was half as good as theirs, how harmonious and stable would society be? But fortunately the constable just now was only a woman. Otherwise he really would not be able to escape today. A woman should stay at home and do embroidery. Why did she come out to be a constable? Would she be able to get married in the future? Why don't you take a detour? Before Li Yi had time to think about whether the female constable would be able to get married or not, he suddenly heard a slightly familiar voice behind him. His face slightly stiffened and the next moment he broke into a run without hesitation. Whoosh! A beautiful figure fell from the sky and landed gracefully in front of him, blocking his way. Looking at the woman in front of him who was looking at him with a playful expression, Li Yi's face became a little bitter. "I'm doomed. I didn't expect this female constable to be a master." Chapter 101. Walking on the wide main street of Qing and Prefecture once again, Li Yi's mood was completely different. The women in this world were not to be trifled with. This was the conclusion that Li Yi came to after living here for so long. Any random woman he met on the street could be a hidden heroine whose martial arts were frighteningly high. When that woman descended from the sky and blocked his way, Li Yi knew that he couldn't leave today. He regretted not bringing Fang with him today. Even if he came out with Lu Rui he wouldn't end up like this. Luckily he wasn't alone. The son of the county magistrate and the two young scholars were standing next to him, looking dejected. They would occasionally turn their heads to glare at Li Yi fiercely, but when they saw the beautiful constable, they would quickly turn their heads back. The county yamen wasn't a good place to be, especially when one was caught for fighting. Luckily, this female constable didn't even give face to the son of the county magistrate. She could be considered as impartial. Fighting could be big or small. At this level it was at most disturbing the peace. A fine of a few taels of silver was the most they could do. However, if the county magistrate wanted to make things difficult for him because of his son, things would be a little difficult. At that time he might really have to use the name of Prince Ning to stabilize the situation first. On the day of the Mid-Autumn Festival, Li Xian once patted his chest and said that in this prefecture, if anyone encountered any problems they could look for him. Li didn't take it to heart at that time. Now that he thought about it, the little prince really had a crow's mouth. The female constable followed behind them. When her beautiful eyes swept across Li Yi's body, there would occasionally be a flash of surprise. The scholar in front of her looked gentle and weak, but judging from his movements, he seemed to have some foundation in martial arts. This wasn't common among scholars. Of course, this wasn't what puzzled her. Although it was rare for scholars to practice martial arts, it wasn't enough to surprise her. The reason why she paid more attention to the scholar was that she had never seen his martial arts style before. Because of her family background, she did not dare to say that she had read all the martial arts in the world, but her knowledge was extraordinary. Even if she could not name all the martial arts in Jianghu, she could still tell the way. However, the move that the scholar used just now was extremely strange. It was completely different from the various martial arts in Jianghu, but it was definitely not a random move. This made her a little curious. If Li Yi had known that the reason this female constable had brought him to the yamen was because she was curious about his martial arts, he would never have used Tai Chi to tease these three fellows. Naturally, the Taiji moves in the Library of Heaven's path had been simplified. They might be able to strengthen one's body, but it was impossible for one to become a Taiji expert. A few days ago he practiced Tai Chi in the morning just for fun. However, ever since he taught Tai Chi to Lu Rui, she would occasionally dismantle the moves and add some variations to them. Then she would give them back to Li Yi. This made this set of martial arts that was used by uncles and aunties in the later generations to have some offensive power. Tai Chi was a martial art that used the weak to defeat the strong, and used softness to overcome hardness. It required less strength, which was suitable for the current Li Yi. As for the improved moves, he didn't stop practicing them. "Hey Emingzu, where are you going?" The female constable was pondering over the moves that the scholar used just now. At this moment, a voice suddenly came from behind her. The young and handsome man caught up from behind and asked her with a smile. The woman frowned and said, "Back to the yamen." She didn't hear anything for a long time. Seeing that the other party wasn't pestering her like before, she was puzzled. When she looked up, she found that the young man was staring straight ahead. A hint of surprise appeared on his face. He quickly walked to the scholar and said, "Why are you here? How do they know each other?" Seeing this scene, a hint of confusion appeared on the woman's pretty face. Li Yi had never felt like this before. The face of the young prince, Li Xian, was so amiable. "You know each other?" He pointed at the female constable and looked at Li Xian with anticipation. "Yes." Li Xian looked at him and asked with some confusion, "When did you and my cousin know each other?" "Cousin?" Li Yi was finally relieved. They were all from the old Li family, so the distance between them had been greatly shortened. However, since she was Li Xian's cousin, she was also from the royal family. But how could a member of the royal family be a constable? "Are you done? If you are, then follow me back to the yamen." The confusion on the female constable's face disappeared in a flash. Then, she resumed her indifferent expression. "Back to the yamen?" Li Xian was stunned. He turned to look at her and asked, "What crime did he commit?" "It's a misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding." As soon as Li Yi opened his mouth, the female constable waved her hand. "Don't talk nonsense. If you have anything to say, we can talk back to the yamen." Li Xian looked at her, then turned back to look at Li Yi. Whether it was because of their personal relationship or some other reason, he could not sit back and do nothing about what happened today. He quickly walked over and whispered a few words into the woman's ear. The female constable frowned at first, but after a while, her brows relaxed and she looked at Li Yi in surprise. Aunt's chronic illness was cured by the person in front of her. She did not want to make things difficult for him by bringing him back to the yamen. She could ignore Li Xian's reputation, but she still had to consider Uncle Wang's. As she pondered, there was a sudden commotion in the crowd in front of her. "This silver is mine." "Nonsense, it's obviously mine." The faint sound of two people arguing could be heard. Someone in the crowd glanced over and suddenly shouted, "There's a constable over there. Let the constable be the judge." Yes, let the constable be the judge. When they saw a person dressed in a constable's uniform, there was a commotion in the crowd and they immediately rushed over. A few men who had been following Li Xian from afar looked at each other and immediately walked over. They spread out around him and paid attention to any movements in their surroundings. "Lord Constable, you have to uphold justice for this lowly one." A man dressed in coarse cloth grabbed the arm of a scholarly man and walked over to the woman's side as he pleaded. "What exactly happened?" the female constable asked with a frown. "My lord, this lowly one was eating noodles at the noodle stall and accidentally dropped the silver on the ground. This person picked it up and when this lowly one discovered it, I asked him to return it. However, he insisted that the silver was his to begin with." The man looked anxious. "My mother is seriously ill, and this is money for her to buy medicine to save her life. We can't lose it." "What a load of nonsense." The scholarly man glanced at the man and said, "This silver is clearly mine. Don't you dare try to extort me, you scoundrel." After the two of them spoke, the surrounding crowd chimed in one after another. Some agreed with the man, while others stood on the scholarly man's side. The woman rubbed the space between her brows as she listened to the crowd's chatter. She couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. She didn't know which of the two men was telling the truth, but this matter was really hard to determine. Catching a thief was more like it, but solving a case wasn't something she was good at. "Miss, why don't we make a deal?" At that moment, a weak voice was heard from beside her. Chapter 102. A deal? Emingzu turned her head and looked at the scholar with a hint of surprise in her eyes. She said lightly, "What kind of deal?" "I'll help you solve the case in front of you and you let me go. Then we're even." Li looked at her and said. Li Xian pulled his sleeve and whispered, "Do you really know who this silver belongs to?" He knew his cousin's character very well. It would be fine if Li didn't say anything. If he found out that he had fooled her in the end, it would not be easy to solve today's matter. Li gave him a reassuring look, and Li Xian didn't speak anymore. Although he didn't know how to judge who this silver belonged to, since he knew Li everything he did was unexpected. He didn't know what method Li Yi had thought of at this moment, and he began to look forward to it. What do you have in mind? Li Mingzhu's face showed an expression of interest. Usually, there was no other way to deal with this kind of ambiguous dispute in the county government. After a few floggings they would confess. There was no need to be so troublesome. She wanted to see what the scholar could do. It's very simple. Since we can't tell who this silver belongs to, we can just split it in half. Everyone will be happy. Li Yi took out 2 pieces of silver from his bosom, each about half a tael. He snatched the silver from the Confucian scholar's hand and stuffed them into the bosom of the burly man and the Confucian scholar. Seeing this scene, the young prince, Li Xian, couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. This method was really simple and crude. But could his cousin pass it? Sure enough, when he turned his head and peeped, he found that the scholar's face became a little ugly. The young man surnamed Lu and the other 2 stood aside and watched the scene. Seeing this, they almost couldn't help laughing. If everything could be solved in this way, why did they need the county magistrate? Isn't this a mess? What kind of method is this? This scholar is just messing around. How can he solve a case like this? Seeing this, the onlookers immediately became noisy, one after another, talking at the same time. Sir, you mustn't do that. If I lose half of the money, I won't be able to buy my mother's medicine. The burly man's face immediately revealed a pleading expression as he looked at Mingzhu and said, "This young master's words are reasonable. A scholar should have a magnanimous heart. I won't argue with a scoundrel like you. How about I give you half of the silver?" When the Confucian scholar heard this, a trace of joy appeared on his face and he immediately said, "Is this the solution you mentioned?" Mingzhu turned to look at Li Yi, a dangerous glint flashed in her eyes. "Of course not." Li Yi smiled, looked at her and said calmly, "There is only one truth." He suddenly turned around and pointed his finger at the Confucian scholar, shouting, "Murderer! Bah! He's the one who lied." The situation changed so quickly that no one in the crowd could react. While the Confucian scholar was still in a daze, Li Yi had already snatched the silver fragment from his hand and stuffed it into the burly man's arms along with the silver ingot. "Be careful next time. Take these 2 silver fragments as well. Buy your mother's medicine quickly." Li Yi was not a generous person, but if the burly man had not lost the silver, he might have been taken to the county government by the female arrestor. It was rare for her to be generous to him. What's going on? The young prince, Li Xian, was confused and still in a daze. The onlookers also started to ask questions. What? Why are you so sure that he's the one who lied? I can't figure it out. Everyone looked at Li Yi waiting for his explanation. Mingzhu's pretty face showed a trace of doubt and some realization. She also turned to look at him. Nonsense. Why are you so sure that I'm the one who lied? The Confucian scholar's face showed a trace of panic, but it was soon replaced by grief and indignation. He looked at Li Yi as if he was really wronged. Because the silver originally belonged to this burly man, so of course he didn't want to give half of it to others for no reason. Li Yi smiled and pointed at the Confucian scholar, saying, "And he, because the silver didn't belong to him, he could get half of it for no reason." Of course, he agreed so readily. Hearing his explanation, Li Xian's face showed a look of realization. He looked at him in surprise. How did he come up with such an ingenious way to solve the case? And the pretty Mingzhu next to Li Yi also looked at him differently for the first time. After hearing Li Yi's words, the crowd was stunned for a moment, then they immediately burst into an uproar. This young master's words make sense. Brilliant, really brilliant. I was almost cheated by this guy just now. I almost wronged this burly man. In an instant the way everyone looked at Li Yi changed. Their gazes were filled with respect and admiration. When they turned to look at the Confucian scholar, their faces were filled with disdain. What a disgrace to a scholar. As a scholar, how could he do such a despicable thing? He even cheated his mother of money to save her life. Is he still human? Take him to the magistrate. At this moment, the Confucian scholar's face finally showed panic. When he raised his head to look at Li Yi, his heart was filled with grief and indignation. Trap, it was all a trap. So the other party had set a trap for him from the beginning, waiting for him to fall into it. But at this moment he naturally couldn't admit it. With a wronged expression he said loudly, "This is just your deduction. I didn't expect that my momentary kindness would be taken advantage of by a villain. I'm not convinced. I want to go to the county government, I want to see the county magistrate." Not convinced? Li Yi narrowed his eyes. Are you really not convinced? I'm not convinced. The Confucian scholar raised his head and looked at him with a trace of resentment in his eyes. Smack. Li Yi slapped his head. Are you convinced? The Confucian scholar didn't expect that this scholar would dare to hit him on the street. He was stunned. When he came to his senses, he pointed at him with a trembling finger. You, how dare you hit me? So what if I hit you? Li Yi frowned and slapped him again. Are you convinced? No. Are you convinced? Ouch. I'm not convinced even if you beat me to death. Seeing Li Yi slap the Confucian scholar's head again, the crowd was stunned on the spot. The corner of young Prince Li Xian's mouth twitched again. As for the young man with the surname Lu and the other two, they seemed to have thought of something bad, and their faces all darkened. On the other hand, the female constable crossed her arms and looked at the scene with interest. She didn't seem to want to stop it at all. Are you convinced? After countless slaps, even his hands were a little numb. The Confucian scholar finally couldn't take it anymore. Stop hitting me. I'm convinced. I picked up the silver on the street. At this moment, the Confucian scholar only felt that his head was getting bigger and he was dizzy. With tears in his eyes, he said, I lost all my money in the gambling house this morning. When I passed by that man, I saw the silver fall from his arms, so I got the idea. Please stop hitting me. Seeing that the Confucian scholar finally admitted it, Li Yi let out a long sigh of relief and withdrew his hand. He straightened his body and looked at the female constable with a smile. Look, he admitted it. Chapter 103. Thank you, young master. Thank you for upholding justice for me. The man held the silver in his hand and bowed to Li Yi with a flushed face. When Li Yi proposed to split the silver, the man was still complaining about him. Now that he knew it was all part of Li Yi's plan, he felt very guilty. This young master was helping him, but he doubted him just now. You shouldn't have. Li Yi smiled at the man and turned to the female constable. He cupped his hands and said, The case has been solved. I'll take my leave now. Just as he was about to walk out of the crowd, he saw the woman suddenly reach out to grab him. Li Yi was startled. His feet curved in an arc. Just as the woman's hand was about to grab him, he used a push hand, causing her wrist to turn at an angle. Naturally, this grab missed. After personally experiencing this strange martial art, a look of astonishment appeared on the woman's face once again. You didn't keep your promise. Li Yi took the opportunity to take a step back and pointed at her angrily. When did I say that I would let you go? The woman looked at him and said indifferently. Just now you. Li Yi only said a few words before he said nothing else. After thinking for a while, he realized that she really didn't say that. Boss, what happened? A few constables ran over from afar. When they saw the county magistrate's son standing there with a swollen face, they were shocked and turned to ask the woman. Bring them back to the yamen. The female constable pointed at the young man with the surname Lu and the other two. Then, she pointed at the Confucian scholar who was still standing at the side with his hands on his head. Immediately, the constables restrained them. Young master, I'm sorry. A constable walked to the young man with the surname Lu and said in a low voice. He put his hand on the young man's shoulder symbolically. Compared to the county magistrate's son, he was obviously more unwilling to provoke the female constable. Seeing that she didn't point at Li Yi, the young man with the surname Lu widened his eyes and said with great grief and indignation, Where is he? The female constable ignored him and said indifferently, Take him away. Yes. Although the constables didn't know what happened, they still responded respectfully and escorted the few people to the yamen. This is not fair. You're condoning and shielding. Is there still any law? The voice of the youth surnamed Lu gradually faded away. The female constable glanced at Li Yi but didn't say anything else. She turned around and left in a carefree manner. He turned around and said to Li Xian, Thank you very much for what you did today. Seeing that the powerful woman had left, Li Yi finally let out a sigh of relief. He turned around and cupped his hands towards Li Xian. He was a little impulsive today. If he hadn't met Li Xian, he would have been in trouble. Darn it. Li Xian smiled and suddenly said, However, if you feel that you owe me a favor and feel bad about it, why don't you give me a few poems? Li 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 Yu Xian, Li Li King Yu Li Li, Li 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 of. Li Li Xian said. Li Li Xian Li Li, but if you feel bad about owing me a favor, why don't you give me a few poems? Li Xian shook his head. Li Yi was stunned. What do you mean by the Jing Kingdom's #1 scholar? The young prince Li Xian looked around. Seeing that the crowd hadn't dispersed, he said, This isn't a good place to talk. Let's find a quiet place and talk while we drink. Hearing Li Xian's words, the expressions of the people scattered around him changed. After a while in a restaurant in Qing'an Prefecture in a private room, Li Xian looked at Li Yi in surprise and asked, "You really don't know?" Li Yi drank a cup of tea to moisten his throat and replied, "I really don't know." He really didn't know when he became the #1 scholar of the Jing kingdom that Li Xian mentioned. That, Immortal of the Magpie Bridge, was it really written by you? Li Xian asked again. Brother Xiaoyu, please forgive me, please forgive me. Li Yi prayed in his heart and nodded shamelessly. You really can't judge a book by its cover. I didn't think that your literary talent would be so high. Li Xian looked at him with a different expression. Although the title of Jing Kingdom's #1 scholar was only known in Qing and Prefecture and hadn't been recognized by all the scholars in the world, to be able to make those old men act like this, it was already extremely impressive. After all, even though he was a young prince, he had only received the evaluation of rotten wood cannot be carved from them. Thinking about how this fellow could receive such an evaluation from those arrogant old men, he couldn't help but feel a little indignant. So what if I'm rotten wood? Did I beg you to carve me? You're really crazy. Of course, these words could only be said in his heart and he absolutely didn't dare to say it out loud. What do you mean by you can't judge a book by its cover? Li Yi looked at Li Xian with a strange expression. Did he even know how to converse? Moreover, although he missed that face that he had seen for 20 years, he had to admit that in terms of appearance the current one was still a little better. Even if it was Li Xian himself, he wouldn't dare to say that he was more handsome than him, right? Among the women who invited you that day, there were famous courtesans from Qing and Prefecture, and Mingzhu from the rich and powerful families, and even the daughter of the prefectural magistrate. After that night, who knows how many famous courtesans from the brothels said that they were willing to sleep with you. As he spoke, the young Prince Li Xian's face was full of envy. Li Yi's expression was a little dazed. Did this mean that if he went to sleep with him, he wouldn't have to pay if he went to the brothels in the future? He looked up at the opposite side and got a positive answer from Li Xian's face. In that case, he didn't have to work hard to sell candied haws, floral water, and so on. Now he could sell autographs and portraits to make money? If a poem was written on the portrait, the price might even be doubled. This was a business that was almost guaranteed to be profitable. As he thought of this, the scene of being surrounded by women that day suddenly appeared in his mind. The expression on Li Yi's face froze, and he immediately dispelled this idea. One shouldn't be too ambitious. It was better to do business down to earth and be a quiet and handsome man. Tell me, when will my cousin treat me like those women treat you? How good would that be? Li Xian seemed to have triggered something in his heart. He showed a look of longing and muttered to himself. Li Yi suddenly looked up at him and couldn't believe his ears. Cousin? That female constable just now? Li Xian, this guy actually likes his cousin? At this moment, his mind had automatically filled in the scenes of a vigorous moral drama. When he looked at him again, the expression in Li Yi's eyes changed for the first time. It was as if he was looking at a beast. An ill-fated relationship. Chapter 104. A cousin marrying a younger cousin and a younger cousin marrying a younger cousin. If this had happened in the future, not only would the law not allow it, but even if they had such an idea, they would still have their legs broken by the parents of the two parties. But in today's era, it was a very normal thing. The saying, cousin and younger cousin are a match made in heaven, had existed since ancient times. The ancients, who did not have the concept of genes and heredity, thought this was adding family to family. Thus, such a twisted complex was created. After thinking through this matter, the strange look in Li Yi's eyes slowly disappeared. He let out a long sigh. Child, the fault is not on you, the fault is on this world. However, it seemed that in the ancient times of his original world, cousins could marry but cousins could not. Although the people of that era were still lacking in scientific knowledge, the concept of ethics and morality was more profound than that of the later generations. Cousins were considered to be very closely related by blood, so they were definitely not allowed to get married. If anyone dared to have any ideas about their cousin, they would still have their legs broken. Could it be that the people of this world did not have such an understanding? When he became more familiar with Li Xian, he wanted to find a chance to remind him. If the two of them really did get married in the future and gave birth to an idiot or a child with some kind of birth defect, Li Yi would really feel apologetic. That's right, where do you live? Why can't so many people in Qing and Fu find you? Even the daughter of Magistrate Dong couldn't find you after using the power of the government. Li Xian looked at him and suddenly remembered something. He had been puzzled about this matter for a long time. That time, when he cured his mother's depression, Ning Wangfu had also sent people to search for him, but to no avail. There were quite a few people named Li Yi in the records of the government, but after investigating them one by one, they found that none of them were the person they were looking for. There was one person whose age and identity matched, but when they sent people to ask, they found that the scholar named Li Yi had lost his mind not long ago. After running out of the village, he had never returned. The villagers searched everywhere but to no avail. They had already reported him to the government and listed him as a missing person. Losing his mind, naturally it wouldn't be him. He lives in a remote area outside the city. It's normal that he can't find him, Li Yi replied. Li Xian seemed to think of something and said, "In a few days it will be my mother's birthday. You should come with us. Last time you cured my mother's illness, the whole mansion has not properly thanked you." The people who would attend Wang Fei's birthday would definitely be people of status in Qing and prefectural city. Why would he go? Li Yi had originally wanted to find a reason to refuse, but after some thought, an idea suddenly popped into his mind. After a moment of hesitation, he still nodded his head. "There are still some days before my mother's birthday. Tell me your address and I'll send someone to invite you." "Forget it, we'll talk about this later." Li Xian waved his hand and looked at him with an expectant expression. He said, "Let's talk about how many poems you are going to give me." Clearly this was still on Li Xian's mind. "Are you so sure that your cousin likes things like poems?" Li Yi sighed and looked at him as he asked. He always thought that his emotional intelligence was low enough. He didn't think that there would be a weirdo whose emotional intelligence was even lower than his. "These women, don't they all like poems?" Li Xian raised his head to look at him and asked with a stunned expression. Those so-called scholars in Qing and prefectural city often used a few poems to trick the hearts of those women. Wasn't it because they all liked this kind of style? Putting aside the distant, once the immortals of the Magpie Bridge and Shuidiao Ghetto appeared, who knew how many women in Qing and prefectural city secretly admired Li Yi? Didn't this mean something? Li Yi looked at him like he was looking at an idiot. "You've known her for so long, have you ever seen her talk about poems in front of you?" The expression on Li Xian's face froze. After thinking for a moment, he shook his head and said, "I don't think so. The women of the world all have different appearances and different personalities. How can they be lumped together? They are actually the same as men. There are those who revere literature and those who revere martial arts. Which type do you think she is?" Although Li Yi had only met the female bailiff once, he had some understanding of her personality. Her martial arts were so high that she was probably the same type Rui and Rui. Those who revere martial arts usually look down on scholars who didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken. She was far from those young ladies of noble families who could win their hearts with just a few words of romance. On the other side, after hearing Li Yi's words, Li Xian's expression had become serious. He seemed to have sunk into deep thought. Li Yi stood up and patted his shoulder. "When pursuing a woman, you can't be too hasty. First, you need to understand her likes and dislikes. Acting rashly will only produce the opposite of the desired result." As the words left his mouth, he felt that something was amiss. Was he teaching Li Xian how to woo a woman? Woo his cousin? In that case he was actually helping him, in his sin? At this moment, Li Xian's face revealed a look of realization. When he looked at Li Yi again, his expression had changed considerably. He cupped his hands and said, "Listening to a wise man's words is better than reading books for 10 years. You are the true expert in this field. I should have known that you would be able to conquer such a beautiful wife's younger sister. Admirable, admirable." Li Yi's expression darkened again. He felt that he could no longer continue the conversation with this fellow. After the conversation, Li Xian was no longer concerned about how many poems Li Yi should give him in return for his kindness. He turned his attention to something else. Before they parted, he once again reminded Li Yi that the next time they met, they must have a good conversation. What was the matter with this psychology of women, and 36 ways to woo a woman, that Li Yi had mentioned? The address that Li Yi left behind was not the Willow Leaf Stockade. At that time, the shops in the prefectural city would probably be open for business. He could go there directly to find him. As for the fact that Li Yi had opened a shop in Qing and prefecture, Li Xian was still somewhat surprised. Scholars, farmers, merchants had low status. Generally speaking, scholars were disdainful of doing business, thinking that it would lower their status. Many high officials and nobles were like Ning Wangfu. Although they also had business outside, they would never stand in the open and cooperate with those merchants. They would leave the public matters to them. However, he knew Li Yi's way of doing things. He had never been able to figure out Li Yi's way of doing things. He didn't seem like an orthodox scholar at all. If not for that, Li Xian might not have been interested in him in the first place. Of course, as for the Rui Du, that he had never heard of, Li Xian also had a strong curiosity in his heart. That strange painting and sugar-coated Haws, the things that he made were always unusual. He didn't know what the Rui Du was. When the time came, he must see it. Chapter 105. The shop in the prefectural city was about to open, and Li Yi planned to be the boss himself. After all, although the village was quiet and peaceful, it was perfect for retirement. However, he had not saved enough for retirement yet, so he had to work hard for a few more days. Of course, living in the village for too long would be boring. The prefectural city was bustling, and it was far more interesting than staying here. However, this reason was not as important as the previous one. As such, he naturally had to put aside the matter of the school. With his current influence in the village, he could already make decisions for such a small matter. Most of the direct descendants of the Liu family relied on him to make money, so they naturally had no objections. "Miss Qin, I'll have to trouble you to take care of these children in the future," said Li Yi as he cupped his hands and bowed to a seemingly weak young girl at the entrance of the school. The young girl's surname was Qin, and her first name was Qin. She looked a little delicate, and her body exuded a faint scholarly aura. Qin Qing's grandfather was Mr. Qin. Before Li Yi came here, he was the one who taught in the school. However, he accidentally fell and injured his leg a few days ago, so he would probably have to stay in bed for the rest of his life. After Li Yi left, the school still had to continue. In the future, the young girl in front of him would take over his position. She had been by Mr. Qin's side since she was young, so she could read and write. She could be considered one of the few cultured people in the village. Of course, there were still many people in the village who had doubts about how a woman could become a teacher. However, they had no say in this matter. Ever since they were able to establish a business relationship with Li Yi, they could not wait to build a good relationship with him. Perhaps one day when he was in a good mood, they could even waive some of the joining fees. Naturally, they would not oppose him on such a small matter. "Brother-in-law, can I really become a teacher?" The naughty children in the school did not see the two of them and were still playing around inside. The young girl glanced into the room, and a hint of hesitation appeared on her pretty face as she asked timidly. When Li Yi asked for her opinion, the young girl hesitated for a long time before agreeing. Firstly, it was because she really liked these things in her heart. Previously, when her grandfather was a teacher in the school, she often looked forward to when she could stand in that position. However, it was just a thought. After all, in this world, women could not do things as freely as men. Another reason was that they had received too much kindness from Li Yi in the past few days. It was impossible for her to refuse such a small matter. Their father passed away when they were young, and there were only their mother, daughter, and their elderly grandfather at home. Although life was hard before, they could still get by. However, after their grandfather accidentally broke his leg, life became more and more difficult. If it wasn't for Xiao Huan, who often brought him rice and noodles, he would have died a long time ago. Therefore, the girl's family was extremely grateful to them. "Don't worry. It's just teaching them a few words every day. It's not that difficult." Li smiled. Out of habit, he wanted to reach out and pat her on the shoulder to show his encouragement. Halfway through, he realized that it was not appropriate. He retracted his hand and pointed to the inside of the school. "Let's go in." Hearing this, the young girl nodded and followed behind Li Yi. After the two of them walked into the school, the originally unusually noisy naughty children immediately quieted down and obediently returned to their seats. Seeing that there was a beautiful older sister next to the teacher today, the naughty children's eyes immediately sized her up. Most of them knew that this older sister seemed to be Mr. Qin's family, but they didn't know why this older sister came with the teacher today. "Today we won't be in class. Last time we talked about the story of Hou Yi shooting the sun. Today we will talk about Kua Fu chasing the sun, Chang Yi flying to the moon, Jing Wei filling the sea." Qin Qing took the initiative to sit on the side. Li Yi's gaze swept across the school as he spoke. With this sentence, the naughty children's attention immediately shifted away from the young girl. Their faces revealed extreme excitement. In the past, as long as they performed well in class, the teacher would tell them a story after class. From those stories, they learned that heaven and earth used to be connected. There was a giant called Pangu who used an axe to split heaven and earth. The earliest people were molded from mud by goddess Nuwa. There used to be 10 suns in the sky, and a master archer called Ho-E shot down 9 of them with his bow. These stories were like the monkey with the stick, deeply attracting the naughty children. Today the teacher was actually going to tell so many stories. To these naughty children, it was undoubtedly more joyous than the new year. When the young girl called Qin Qing heard the slow and magnetic voice, she turned her head and saw the naughty children's small faces that were focused on the story. Her heart seemed to be touched by something. These half-grown children were extremely mischievous and ran amok in the village. Who knew how much trouble they had caused her? At that moment, when she saw those innocent and extremely clear eyes, a seed was quietly planted in her heart. When she turned her head to look at Li Yi, she also longed for the day when she could be like this, loved and respected by these children. After a few stories were told, the naughty children still had expressions of reminiscence on their faces. Li Yi stood up and looked at them. From today onwards, Sister Qin will be teaching all of you in my place. You must be obedient like before. Don't bully her, understand? When the naughty children heard this, their expressions froze. Then they suddenly looked at Li Yi and looked a little flustered. Is the teacher leaving? Why is the teacher leaving? Did we make the teacher angry? Teacher, don't go. We will definitely be obedient. The naughty children were of different ages. The oldest was a little over 10 years old, while the youngest was only 7 or 8. When they heard that Li Yi was leaving, they all looked flustered. Seeing the naughty children suddenly become abnormally agitated, Li Yi felt a little warm in his heart. Even though these children were a little mischievous, they were still innocent children. After interacting with them for the past few days, it was naturally impossible to say that he didn't have any feelings for them. However, he couldn't be the teacher here for the rest of his life. He would have to leave sooner or later. This moment would come sooner or later. Li Yi stretched out his hand and pressed down. The naughty children's voices gradually became softer, but they still looked at him with expectant eyes. Lu Xiaohu. Li Yi opened his mouth and called out a name. The naughty child with the sturdiest physique immediately stood up from his seat. I'll leave the task of protecting Mr. Qin to you. Can you complete it? Lu Xiaohu's face revealed a serious expression. He suddenly patted his chest. Don't worry, sir. I guarantee that I will complete the task. If anyone dares to bully Mr. Qin, I will beat him up. Hello, Mr. Qin. Seeing the naughty children standing neatly and respectfully saluting her as a disciple, the young girl's heart finally relaxed. After walking out of the classroom, Li Yi turned to look at the young girl and said with a smile, I'll leave these children to you from now on. The teacher's allowance is 1 silver tael per month. When the time comes, I'll have Xiao Huan send it to you. The young girl was stunned for a moment. After regaining her senses, she hurriedly said, Absolutely not. I don't want any allowance. Besides, the teacher in the classroom has never. From now on, there will be. Li Yi waved his hand. Without waiting for her to finish, he smiled and left. The young girl stared at his back in a daze. She couldn't calm down. After a long time, she sighed and turned to walk back into the classroom. Chapter 106. It was the right decision to hand over the construction of the workshop to Fang. In just 5 days, a workshop that Li Yi was extremely satisfied with was completed. When it came to building houses, the men in the stockade were all experts. Even the houses that they were currently living in were built by them. Now that the workshop was completed, they only needed to purchase the raw materials before they could start producing a new batch of ruidu. Before this, Li Yi had spent all the money he had saved from renting the shop on renovating the shop. The floor was paved with wooden flooring and the counters, tables and chairs were all new and custom-made. On the walls around the counters, Li Yi had personally drawn a few landscape paintings. Of course, they were all 3D, and they were so lifelike that one would feel as if their eyes were about to sink into them. If someone were to walk into the shop, they would probably be stunned by these paintings at first glance. Since they had decided to go for the high-end route from the beginning, they could not be frugal in these areas. Even the porcelain bottles that contained the ruidu were very exquisite, and they had cost a lot of money when they were purchased. Seeing the money being spent like water, Fang often showed a pained expression on his face. If this business were to fail, his dream of having a beautiful wife and a big house would never come true. It was very likely that he would have to return to 2 months ago and continue to live a life of eating dirt. After all, he had a share of the shares of ruidu. Although he did not know what the shares were, Fang could still understand why his son-in-law said that he would have a share of the profits from Ruidu. Son-in-law, have you thought about the name of the shop? Fang knew that he was not good at making money, so he changed the topic. I still need to think about it. Li shook his head and said. The name of the shop was the signboard. Once it was decided, it could not be changed and the decision could not be made easily. Now all the preparations were in place and everything was ready. All that was missing was the name of the shop. Why don't we call it Six Gods Workshop? Li raised his head and wanted to ask for everyone's opinion. Fang's face darkened. He couldn't understand why his son-in-law would fall in love with the name Six Gods. The young maidservant stood beside Li and saw second young miss giving her a look. She immediately said, Son-in-law, I think it sounds better to call it Rui Fang. Rui Square. Li looked at Lu Rui. This matter clearly had nothing to do with her. Why did she have to take advantage of him every time? If Rui's became popular in the Jing kingdom in the future, and every major city had a Rui store, would people think of Lu Rui or him? No, this was a huge loss. Li felt that it was better to call it Six Spirits Lane. For the sake of her being his sister-in-law, he had already given her a lot of face by naming the floral water in this world as Rui's due. This time he was determined not to give in. Rui Fang. Fang muttered the name, shook his head and said, This name is not very good. We are doing serious business. Rui Fang, Rui Fang. It sounds like a new brothel in the prefecture. Li was keenly aware that as Fang spoke, the surrounding atmosphere suddenly became subtle. Clang. This was the sound of a sword being unsheathed. Feeling the two cold eyes behind him, Fang couldn't help but shiver, and cold sweat rolled down his forehead. It was only at this moment that he realized why he had a bad feeling when he spoke just now. He straightened his chest and his expression became solemn. He looked at Li seriously and said, Young master, I suddenly feel that the name Rui Fang is very good. Since we are selling Rui's due, the name of the store should naturally match it. I think there is no more suitable name than Rui Fang. Li couldn't help but sigh in his heart as he looked at the righteous Lao Fang. How did that resolute man from back then turn into such a person? I also think that it's better to call it Rui Fang, Lu Rui said with a smile. Although the name of the store was ultimately up to Li, the public opinion was obviously on Lu Rui's side. Li couldn't be arbitrary. He looked up at them and said, Are you really not going to consider Six Spirits Lane? In order to fully promote democracy, the name of the store was decided. On the same day he and Fang ordered a signboard in the prefecture city. In order to further enhance the store's prestige, Li found all of Wang Shiji's calligraphy in the library. After digesting them, he found the three words Ru, Yi, and Fang, and wrote them out personally. Of course, even if he had such a heaven-defying cheating device, he only needed to copy it. He wouldn't be able to reach Wang Shiji's level, but being able to copy 80 to 90% of it was enough to shock many people. At least, the shopkeeper who made the signboard was shocked by the elegant semi-cursive script. He had been running this ancestral shop for several decades and had made countless plaques. He had seen many authentic works of famous masters. Under the influence of what he had seen and heard, even though the shopkeeper's calligraphy skills were not very profound, few people could compare to him in terms of his ability to appreciate calligraphy. It was just 3 words, but it was enough to show that the calligraphy skills of the person who wrote it were profound. Without decades of practice, it would be impossible to achieve this. This level of skill could probably be compared with several calligraphy masters in the world. However, which one of those people didn't have decades of accumulation in order to achieve what they had today? If the scholar hadn't written in front of him, he definitely wouldn't believe that such wonderful calligraphy could be written by such a young man. Li wasn't surprised by the shopkeeper's shocked expression. That was the sage of calligraphy, Wang Shiji, who had influenced Chinese calligraphy for more than 2,000 years. How could his calligraphy be ordinary? Of course, Li was still very happy that the shopkeeper insisted on not taking his money. Now was the time for his career to start, so he should save as much as possible. The sage of calligraphy really deserved his reputation. Looking at the shopkeeper holding the piece of paper as if it was a treasure, Li couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The opening of the new store was supposed to do some publicity and marketing, but Li wasn't in a hurry to do that. He still had some confidence in Rui Lu. However, this confidence was shaken on the first day of the store's opening. After half a day, not even a bottle of Rui Lu was sold. A few people entered the store to take a look, but when they heard that such a small bottle of Rui Lu was sold for 1 tael of silver, They immediately left as if they were escaping before Li Yi introduced the function of Rui Lu. Could it be that I set the price too high? After half a day, even Li Yi began to doubt it. One tael of silver was not a small amount for most people in the prefecture. Although they could afford it, they wouldn't be so extravagant as to buy such a bottle of something they didn't know the function of. Where are the local tycoons? Li Yi sat behind the counter and saw that there were only him and the young maidservant in the entire store. He couldn't help but start to call out in his heart. The young maidservant sat by the table with one hand supporting her chin. She looked out of the door and watched the passers-by with boredom. At a certain moment, two figures stopped in front of the door for a moment and then walked in. The young maidservant came back to her senses and immediately stood up from the chair and ran over. "Ladies, welcome to Rui Workshop." She bowed and said with a clear voice. Chapter 107. Welcome. It was obvious that this was the first time the two young ladies had heard this greeting. Their expressions froze and a trace of astonishment appeared on their pretty faces. In a world that was filled with, "Please come in, what would you like to eat, what would you like to order, and what would you like to order," the words "welcome" from a pretty servant girl in a shop that they didn't know what it was selling was extremely refreshing and refined. The servant girl's attitude made them feel very comfortable. Just as they walked into the shop, their mood strangely became better. When they passed by the street earlier, they discovered that there was a new shop called Rui Square. They couldn't tell what it was selling from the shop's name, but the three words on the shop's signboard seemed to have the demeanor of a great family. It was very extraordinary, and compared to the other shops along the street, it was like a crane among a flock of chickens. This made the two ladies a little curious and they couldn't help but walk in. However, this extraordinary servant girl was only secondary. When the two ladies raised their heads and looked into the shop, their delicate bodies couldn't help but tremble. One of the ladies even covered her small mouth and almost cried out. They saw that there were many paintings hanging on the walls of the shop. What was strange was that in these paintings, whether it was the mountains, rivers, or people, they all looked like they were about to break out of the paintings. At first glance, even a normal person would be shocked. First, it was the elegant calligraphy. Now, it was the extremely strange paintings. This caused the two ladies' curiosity towards this shop to increase greatly. "To Mrs. Please sit." The servant girl's voice was gentle. The two ladies walked to the side of the table and chairs. No matter whether it was the floor or the chairs, they were all spotless. The moment they sat down, the servant girl had already brewed fragrant tea and stood quietly to the side. After walking into the shop, no matter if it was the environment or the servant girl's attitude, they all felt that it was just right. They didn't feel cold or annoyed. It was quiet and comfortable. There seemed to be a unique fragrance in the air that made people feel relaxed and happy. Following the scent, the two ladies' gazes quickly focused on a porcelain bottle on the table. "What is this?" Confusion appeared in the eyes of the two women as they looked at the servant girl. "This item is called Rui Du. It's our shop's newest product. It has the effect of cooling, refreshing, repelling mosquitoes and relieving itching." A voice came from behind. The two girls turned around and saw a handsome young man walking out from behind the counter. He looked at them and said with a smile, "This young master is so handsome." Seeing the handsome young master with a jade-like face, the two women blushed slightly and thought to themselves, "May I ask, young master, how do I use this Rui Du?" She didn't expect the shopkeeper to be such a handsome young master. A woman stood up and said with a faint smile. Li Yi opened the porcelain bottle on the table and introduced it to them. "When bathing or washing clothes, put a few drops of Rui Du in it. It can cool down in summer and relieve itching in autumn. In addition, when washing every day, if you put a few drops of Rui Du in the water, it can also reduce the possibility of getting sick." The greatest effect of floral water was actually not repelling mosquitoes, but its sterilization function. It was just that the ancients did not have the concept of bacteria, and their awareness of hygiene was far from comparable with modern times. Li Yi could only change to a popular explanation. The two women had personally felt the refreshing effect of Rui Du. At this time, the woman who spoke just now asked again, "Young master said that this Rui Du can repel mosquitoes, is it true?" "Miss, you can try it. If it is false, I am willing to pay you back double the original price," Li Yi said with a smile. He had personally tried the effect of floral water. Although the conditions were limited and the effect could not be compared with the later generations, he was still very satisfied with the effect of repelling mosquitoes. When the woman heard the words, her face showed obvious interest. Since the beginning of autumn, mosquitoes were rampant. She would be bitten by mosquitoes almost every day. She did not know why. After the maids in the mansion were bitten, they would get a small bump and itch for a while. Whenever she was bitten, it would immediately become red and swollen. It was extremely itchy and unbearable. Many methods had been tried, but there was still not much effect. In addition, for women, it was their nature to love beauty. How could they let others see such an embarrassing appearance? They could only stay in the tent in the room all day, and even their mood became gloomy. Today's weather was fine, and she came out for a walk with her friends. She did not expect that there would be such a strange thing in a newly opened shop here. If what this young master said was true, no matter how high the price was, she would buy this ruidu at all costs. "May I know the price of this ruidu?" The woman looked up at Li Yi and asked. Whether this thing was useful or not, she still had to try it out. However, since he dared to say that just now, he must have great confidence in this thing. 1 tael of silver for each bottle. Li Yi had been observing this woman. Looking at her clothing, she seemed to be a young lady from a rich family. She shouldn't be scared away by this price, right? 1 tael of silver? The woman's expression froze when she heard this, as if she did not dare to believe it. This kind of strange thing was actually only selling for 1 tael of silver? Even a piece of jewelry that she usually wore would cost dozens to hundreds of taels. 1 tael of silver to her was really nothing. Seeing the shocked expression on her face, Li Yi thought that she was scared by the price. After thinking for a moment, he clenched his teeth and said, "Miss, you are the first customer since the opening of this shop. You can enjoy a half-price discount. You only need 5 taels of silver to take away a bottle of ruidu." The woman returned to her senses and said with a smile, 1 tael of silver is 1 tael of silver. If this thing is useless, I will come find you again tomorrow. The woman in front of him was obviously a fair, rich, and beautiful woman with strong principles. No matter what, she was not willing to pay half price. She took out 1 tael of silver from her purse and asked Li Yi again for instructions on how to use it. Then she left the shop with the ruidu. After walking out of the shop, her close friend, who had been by her side and had not spoken, looked back into the shop. She turned her head and looked at her with a smile that was not a smile. She whispered, "What do you mean come find me tomorrow? Could it be that our Qin family's young lady has taken a fancy to that young man?" A trace of red appeared on the woman's pretty face. She glared at her friend. "You little girl, don't talk nonsense. If this ruidu doesn't have the effect that he said, I will naturally ask him for an explanation." "An explanation?" The woman beside her heard this and laughed mockingly. "I think it's more like asking for a husband. You damn girl, if you dare to talk nonsense again, see if I don't tear your mouth apart." I don't dare. I will teach you a lesson when we get back." The two figures gradually disappeared from the street. Inside the shop, Li Yi put away the tael of silver and let out a long sigh of relief. No matter what, this first bottle of ruidu was finally sold. Chapter 108. Reality was always crueler than ideal. After a whole day he only sold 2 bottles of ruidu. If it wasn't for Li Yi decisively giving a 50% discount when he saw that the young woman who entered the shop later was tempted but was obviously hesitant about the price, he would only be able to make 1 sale today. This time the god of luck didn't seem to be on his side. In both of his lives he didn't do much business. He had read a lot of books on marketing, but when it came to real use he still couldn't figure it out. In the afternoon he thought of a problem. There were only 3 words "Rui Workshop" hanging there. People didn't know what this shop was doing. So he found a wooden board and erected it at the door. He clearly marked the effects and price of ruidu. After that, more people came into the shop. But when they heard that it would cost 1 tael of silver to buy such a small bottle of mosquito-repellent medicine, they immediately lost interest. For most of the ordinary people in the city, if they were bitten by mosquitoes, they would just spit and wipe it. 1 tael of silver could buy a lot of food. Wasn't it crazy to spend it on this? But there were a few people who asked Li Yi if he would sell the board at the door. It seemed that he admired the calligraphy on it and even offered a price of 10 taels of silver. Of course Li Yi didn't agree. Could it be that he could only rely on his talent to make a living? After a while, when he went out to take a look, the board was actually gone. After a while he could only curse at the damn thief. Tomorrow he would have to find a new board and nail it on the door. Inside the shop, the young servant girl held her chin with one hand and looked at the people coming and going outside. After a long time, a strange sound came from her stomach. Her pretty face slightly blushed. She turned her head to look at Li Yi and said softly, Young master, I'm hungry. He hadn't eaten since morning. Even Li Yi felt a little hungry. He rubbed the young servant girl's head and said, "Okay, let's go out to eat first." Although the room at the back of the shop had been tidied up and there was a small kitchen, Li Yi was not in the mood to cook for himself. He closed the shop door and ate his stomach with Xiao Huan at the noodle stall outside. Originally, he wanted to take the little maidservant to a high-class restaurant to eat something good, but the little maidservant was still thinking about the noodle stall on the street. In the end, the two of them only spent a few copper coins. After the meal, he didn't go back to the shop. There were some things that Li Yi had to think about at home. Every profession had its own unique way of doing things. Previously, he had taken it for granted. In the willow leaf stockade, while Li Yi was lying on his bed, digesting more books on business theory and sales knowledge, in a courtyard with high walls in Qing and prefecture, a charming young woman walked to the door of a room after taking a bath with a bowl of ginseng soup she had personally cooked. "Second madam." The two servants at the door greeted respectfully. "Is master asleep?" the woman asked softly. "No, master hasn't come back yet. He just sent someone to send in a new batch of official documents. They are still in the study," one of the servants replied in a low voice. The woman nodded, took the ginseng soup and walked in a certain direction. In the study, the middle-aged man finished reading a file. He closed his eyes and rubbed the space between his eyebrows. There was a trace of exhaustion between his eyebrows. After a moment, he opened his eyes again and took another document. Before he opened it, the door of the study was pushed open. Hearing the sound, the middle-aged man frowned. What he hated the most when he was working was to be disturbed. If the servants didn't get his orders, they wouldn't dare to come in at this time. After reading the documents for a whole night, he felt dizzy and annoyed. He was about to scold them, but when he looked up and saw the person coming, his expression eased. "Madam, why aren't you resting?" He put down the document in his hand, walked over, took the tray from her hand, put it on the table and said softly. His first wife died when he was young, so this was the only concubine left in the family. Normally, he was busy with official business, so this second madam always took care of everything in an orderly manner. She never caused him any trouble, so she could be considered a good wife. "Master, you are busy with official business, but you still need to take care of your health. I made some ginseng soup for master. Master, drink it while it's hot. It won't be too late to read the documents later." The woman helped him straighten his collar and said with a smile, "Thank you for your hard work, madam." The middle-aged man held her hand and patted it. When he smelled the strange smell coming from her body, he couldn't help but feel shocked, but he didn't care. He drank a bowl of ginseng soup and said, "I still need some time to finish reading these documents. Madam, go rest first." The woman smiled and said, "I'm not tired. I'll stay here with master." The middle-aged man didn't say anything else. He picked up the document on the table again and began to seriously read it. The woman slowly walked to his back, stretched out her lily-white hands, and slowly massaged his shoulders. From time to time he smelled a faint fragrance. The middle-aged man felt his spirit gradually rise, and the trace of tiredness from before was swept away. He couldn't help but speed up as he flipped through the documents. When he reached out his hand again, there were no more documents to take. The night watchman's voice came from outside the study. Only then did he discover that the document that usually took him 2 hours to read had actually taken him less than an hour. When he turned his head, he found that the woman had fallen asleep on the desk at some point in time. Quietly looking at her slightly tired brows, the middle-aged man's heart suddenly surged with a faint trace of guilt. Wasn't he neglecting her a little by devoting himself to his official duties? He took a thin blanket from the bed in the study and was about to cover her when the woman slowly opened her eyes. She got up and looked at him. She asked, "Master, have you finished reading the document?" "Madam, it's been hard on you all these years." The middle-aged man held her hand and sighed. He pulled her into his arms. "Master." She had never seen such a gentle side to him. The woman felt a lump in her throat and tears almost fell. The husband and wife exchanged words of love for a while. The woman lay in the middle-aged man's arms and felt some changes in his body. Her pretty face suddenly became red. She said in a small voice, "Master, this is the study?" A moment later, the middle-aged man held the woman in his arms behind the curtains of the study. He took a whiff of her scent and asked doubtfully, "What other perfume did Madame use tonight?" "After smelling it, your husband felt exceptionally spirited. Even the speed at which I dealt with the documents has increased." "Fragrance?" The woman was lying in his arms with a satisfied expression. She was stunned when she heard this. She said, "I didn't use any fragrance." Before she finished speaking, she suddenly remembered that when she was bathing at night, she had dropped a few drops of the Rui dew that she had bought on the street into the bathtub. Could it be because of this? Yes, that handsome shopkeeper seemed to have said that this Rui dew had the effect of refreshing the mind. Could it be that the master's unprecedented interest tonight was also because of this Rui dew? Chapter 109. For this woman, other than being able to refresh her mind, it was no longer important whether or not this Rui dew had the effect that she thought it had. Tonight, her master was in a great mood. It was rare for him to say so many intimate words to her. In an instant she thought back to 10 years ago when he had just become a jinsher. However, because he was born into a poor family, he did not have any background. He could only become a small county magistrate in a remote place. Although his days were hard, his family was happy and harmonious. After experiencing 10 years of hard work in his official career, he was no longer a small 7th-ranked official. However, he was even busier in his work. Before today, her master had not touched her for several months. Tonight's happiness was completely beyond her expectations. The scholar did not seem to have explained the full effect of this Rui dew. The hidden effect was what she was most satisfied with. She only thought that tomorrow she would definitely buy more Rui dew. Other than the effect, it would be of great help to her master's work. Temporarily putting aside this thought, a trace of red crept up her cheeks and she took the initiative to greet him. The room was filled with love, causing the servant girl standing at the door of the study to blush. The next morning, when the woman walked out of the study, her face was abnormally rosy and she looked much younger. The servant girl in the courtyard secretly looked at the woman. Thinking about the voice she heard at the door last night, a trace of red appeared on her pretty face again. "Xing'er come over." The woman waved her hand and the two pretty servant girls in the courtyard immediately trotted over. "What instructions does madam have?" The beautiful woman opened her mouth and said, "The two of you, go to the accounts room and take 20 taels of silver. Then go to the Rui workshop we went to yesterday and buy a batch of Rui dew." "Yes, madam, we will go now." The young servant girl responded and did not delay in the direction of the accounts room. At the same time, in a deep courtyard on the other side of the prefecture city, a young servant girl knocked on the door of her young miss room. When she walked in, she saw her young miss sitting on the bed in a daze. Somewhat puzzled, she asked, "Young miss, what's wrong?" The woman returned to her senses and said, Go to the street and find a shop called Rui Workshop and buy some Rui dew." "Young miss, what is Rui dew?" This was the first time the young servant girl had heard of this name and a puzzled expression appeared on her face. "When you find that shop you will naturally know." The woman got up from the bed and pointed at the toiletries in the hands of the young maidservant. She ordered, "Put those things down. The shop is in the East Market. It's next to the cloth shop that we went to a few days ago." "Yes, young miss, I will go immediately." Watching the young servant girl leave the room, the woman's eyes moved to a small porcelain bottle on the cabinet in front of the bed. A trace of joy appeared on her pretty face. Last night, she listened to the handsome young master's words and when she took a bath, she dripped some of the Rui dew in. She did not know if she dripped too much, but she could not fall asleep when she lay on the bed. She simply got up and read a book. Later, she did not know when she fell asleep and forgot to open the curtain. If it was in the past, she would definitely be bitten by the autumn mosquitoes and suffer some pain. She did not expect that when she woke up this morning, her body would be fine. There were no signs of mosquito bites. At this moment, she naturally knew in her heart that the handsome young master from yesterday did not lie to her. The first thing she did when she woke up in the morning was to ask her personal servant girl to go to the auspicious luck lane and buy more auspicious dew. Even if she could not use it herself, it was not a bad idea to give it to her sisters. After the young servant girl left the mansion, she walked to the East Market in less than a quarter of an hour. She found the cloth shop that she had visited with the young miss a few days ago. When she looked at the side of the cloth shop, she finally saw the signboard that said Rui Workshop. A trace of joy appeared on her pretty face. Just as she was about to walk over, she suddenly stopped. The door of the shop was closed. Two young girls of the same age as her were standing at the door of the shop. They had a worried look on their faces and were whispering to each other. "Why is it not open today? How are we going to explain this to the madam?" "There is nothing we can do. It is not our fault that the shop is closed. The madam will not blame us. Let's wait for another hour. If the shop is still not open we will go back." As the young servant girl listened to their conversation, she could not help but feel curious. Could it be that she was not the only one who came to buy that ruidu early in the morning? She wanted to see what this ruidu was. The young servant girl thought to herself. She looked at the sky and the gradually bustling market. She could not help but mutter a few words. The shopkeeper of this shop is really lazy. The sun is already shining on his buttocks, but he still doesn't open for business. He will definitely not make any money. Ladies, are you here to buy cloth? The fat shopkeeper of the cloth shop next door asked eagerly when he saw the three young girls standing outside the door. We are not here to buy cloth. Uncle, do you know when this Rui workshop will open? One of the young girls looked at him and asked. Seeing that the three of them were not here to buy cloth, the fat shopkeeper lost his patience and said lazily, I don't know. Perhaps business is not good and they are closed. With that said, he strolled back into his shop. If it were not for the fact that the young girl at the door was extremely delicate, he would not even be interested in talking to her. Ah, closed? The three girls looked at each other with bitter expressions on their faces. Inside the cloth shop, the shopkeeper sat lazily on a wooden armchair. His fat face was also full of doubts. Strange, I don't know what the shop next door is selling. There was not much business yesterday, why is today? In the Willow Leaf Village, Fong also had a bitter expression. His heart ached, but he still looked at Li Yi and comforted him. Young master, don't be sad. Didn't you say that failure is success? The business of ruidu is not good, but we can still sell that liquor. Old Fong knew very well that for the sake of the ruidu business, the son-in-law had built the workshop and rented the shop. He had invested almost all of his wealth into it. If he lost everything, he would definitely feel bad. In fact, Li Yi was not distressed about the money. In the time travel novels that he had read before, there was no lack of floral dew. But why was it that once the floral dew was sold, it immediately became popular all over the world and made a lot of money, but when it came to him, no one cared about it? Everyone was time traveling. Why couldn't he do it? Was he really not as good as others? This kind of blind self-esteem was the reason why he was in a dilemma at the moment. Chapter 110. No matter what, he had spent a lot of effort on the Rui nectar. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Li Yi would not give up easily. Last night he had already thought of a few marketing strategies. If it didn't work, he could find a few shills and create hype. Of course, whether these methods would work or not, he would only know after trying it out. After breakfast, he went down the mountain and returned to the prefecture city. This time he didn't let Xiao Huan follow. However, Fong was worried and had to follow to take a look. He didn't know what the situation was like in the shop, so he didn't feel at ease staying in the stockade. At the entrance of the Rui workshop, there were only two young maidservants left. After waiting for more than an hour, the young maidservant lost her patience. Looks like the shop won't be open in the morning. The two maidservants looked at the sky and saw that it was almost noon. They shook their heads and said, although they couldn't buy the Rui nectar and couldn't report back, it wasn't their fault that the shop wasn't open. They would come back tomorrow. The two of them came to an agreement and were about to leave when they saw a familiar figure walking towards them from the other side of the street. Isn't that the shopkeeper we saw yesterday? One of the maidservants said in surprise. Yes, that's the young master. The other young maidservant immediately said. Yesterday, when they accompanied their madam to buy rouge and face powder on the streets, they accidentally discovered a newly opened shop. Out of curiosity, they walked in. The two maidservants didn't have a deep impression of this shop, but the handsome shopkeeper in the shop made them remember him. Since this young master had arrived, the prosperity lane should be open for business soon. The two servant girls felt a trace of joy in their hearts. They were glad that they did not leave too early. Li Yi didn't notice the two young maidservants at the entrance of the shop. He was thinking about something else. When he opened the door and saw the two young maidservants walking in behind him, he finally realized something. These two young maidservants were here to buy the Rui nectar. One of the young maidservants looked up at him and said in a clear voice. Fong, who was following behind, walked into the shop and saw the scene in front of him. His expression was a little stunned. Didn't the young master say that the business of the Rui nectar wasn't good and no one bought it? What was going on? These two maidservants seemed to have been waiting at the entrance for a long time. They were actually here to buy the Rui nectar? Li Yi just realized that the two maidservants in front of him looked a little familiar. After some thought, he remembered that the woman who bought the Rui nectar yesterday had two maidservants with her. Weren't they the two in front of him? It was gratifying to have a repeat customer on the second day of the shop's opening. At the very least, it meant that the problem did not lie with the Ruidu. It was just his sales method that was wrong. Li Yi took a porcelain bottle from the shelf and handed it over. The young maidservant shook her head when she saw this. She took out 2 ingots of silver and placed them on the counter. She said, "There are 20 taels of silver here. Use it all to buy the Rui nectar." Fang stood at the side and stared blankly at the 2 rich and overbearing maidservants. He couldn't wrap his head around the situation. It hadn't been long since the shop opened and there were already 20 taels of silver in the account. If this was considered bad business, then what was considered good business? Even Li Yi didn't expect that the 2 young maidservants would ask for so much. The first batch of Rui nectar looked like there were only 20 or so bottles. There had to be a few bottles left at home. After selling 2 bottles yesterday, there were only about 20 bottles left in the shop. However, he certainly wouldn't refuse to earn money. There were still 22 bottles of Rui nectar left in the shop. The 20 taels of silver were all sold to the 2 young maidservants. The 2 extra bottles were given to them as gifts. It wasn't convenient for the 2 of them to carry around more than 20 bottles of Rui nectar. Li Yi found a wooden box and put them away. He watched the 2 young maidservants leave the shop with satisfaction. He couldn't help but feel puzzled. So much Rui nectar, how long would it take to use it? Of course, Li Yi didn't know that the woman had already pinned her hopes for a long period of sexual happiness on these small porcelain bottles. Naturally, she had to store some first. "Son-in-law, didn't you say that the shop's business wasn't good?" Fang turned to look at him with a dull gaze. If the Rui nectar could be sold at this speed, then why would he sell candied fruits? He could just sit at home and count the money. Why would he need to go through so much trouble? Li Yi sighed and looked at Fang. He slowly said, "How many times have I told you? You have to take a long-term view. Do you understand long-term? This is only a mere 20 taels of silver. In the future we will make a lot of money. Don't always be satisfied with the current situation. This is just a small step for us." Fang's face showed respect. Son-in-law was indeed a son-in-law. If it was him, he wouldn't be able to keep his composure after earning 20 taels of silver so easily. "Excuse me, do you sell Rui nectar here?" A weak voice sounded from the door. A 15 or 16-year-old maidservant walked into the shop. The first person she saw was a burly man. She couldn't help but feel a little timid and asked in a low voice, "I'm sorry, today's Rui nectar is sold out." Li Yi felt strange. Yesterday no one was interested in Rui nectar. When this shop really couldn't stay open any longer, he could talk to the scholar and perhaps he could rent it out at a low price. At that time the cloth shop could expand. Presumably business would be better. If business was better, he could consider opening a few more shops and hire a few more workers. He could retreat behind the scenes and count his silver. If he could become the largest cloth merchant in Qing and prefectural city in his lifetime, he would have no regrets in this life. Not far away, a dozen or so women walked in this direction in a group. The fat shopkeeper saw clearly that these women were coming in the direction of the cloth shop. A smile immediately appeared on his face. So many customers had come early in the morning. The cloth shop's business was booming. He would talk to the scholar tomorrow. If he was willing to sell this shop, the price could be discussed. This way he would be one step closer to his dream. Thinking of this, the smile on the fat shopkeeper's face became even more radiant. Chapter 112. Ladies, come in and have a look. Our shop just got a new batch yesterday. The fat shopkeeper greeted them with a smile. He watched these women walk past him and stop in front of the shop next door. The fat shopkeeper had already made an inviting gesture. The smile on his face froze. He stood there stupidly, like a statue standing in the autumn morning breeze. "This is Rui Workshop?" The group of women stood at the entrance of the shop, and when they saw the 3 words on the signboard, a few of them immediately revealed shocked expressions. "Flowing like the clouds and flowing water, lively, just like a swimming dragon." The style of these 3 words is already unique, but I've never heard of it before. Could it be that young Master Li created it himself? Hearing this, a woman asked doubtfully, "But didn't they all say that Li's literary talent is brilliant, but his calligraphy is unsightly?" "It's just a rumor. It may not be credible." Another woman curled her lips and said, "Scholars have always despised each other. They are jealous of Li's talent, so it's not strange for them to belittle him." Several women discussed in a low voice at the door. Suddenly, one of them turned around and looked at the figure standing stiffly in the wind. She asked doubtfully, "What happened to him?" "A new batch of new goods." The owner of the cloth shop said what he didn't finish just now in a daze. In the autumn wind, only the sound of heartbreak could be heard. Inside the shop, Li had just put the new batch of ruidu that he had rushed to make yesterday on the counter. He was planning how to promote it after today. In the past 2 days he had crammed some knowledge about business and sales. Now he was no longer as ignorant as he used to be. Ruidu was a new thing that had never been seen before in this world. It was not easy for people here to accept it. There was a sound at the door. Li turned his head and saw the girl who had paid the deposit yesterday coming in from outside. She should be here to take the ruidu. He stood up from his seat. Just as he took a step forward, he was stunned on the spot before he could speak. Looking at the sudden appearance of more than a dozen women in the shop and their eager eyes, Li's heart trembled. He suddenly felt like a sheep entering a pack of wolves. What's going on? Could it be, they are going to rob me? It's over. Li felt some regret. If he had known that the security in Qing'an Prefecture was so bad, he should have brought Fang here today. It didn't seem like a good idea. Fang could handle several men at once. As for women, thinking of his cowardly manner in front of his wife, it was very likely that he couldn't handle such a big scene. If only Rui was here. At the very least he wouldn't be in such a passive position. While Li was observing these women, they were also observing him. This young Master Li, the shopkeeper, is indeed a man of striking appearance. A certain lady's beautiful eyes shone with anticipation. It's him, it's him, it's him. A talented woman who had seen him at the Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet felt her heart beating wildly. So he's young Master Li. I didn't recognize him yesterday and lost the initiative. What a pity, what a pity. The woman surnamed Qin sighed, and her heart was filled with regret. Young master, don't be alarmed. We are here to buy Rui nectar. A woman walked up and said with a smile. Young master, there's no need to panic. We're here to buy Rui dew. A woman walked up and said with a smile. Her words were half-truths. Even though buying the Rui nectar was one of her goals, the most important thing was to meet this legendary talent. Of course, after the previous incident, they didn't dare to be too enthusiastic. If he flew away like last time, where would they go to find him? Young master, don't be alarmed. We are here to buy Rui nectar. These words made Li uncomfortable. Who was alarmed? Which eye of theirs saw him alarmed? He was clearly very calm all the time, okay? He put down the teapot with one hand and moved the other hand away from the abacus. His expression calmed down and a smile returned on his face. Miss, this way please. He led the women to the counter where the Rui nectar was placed and began to introduce it to them carefully. Early in the morning, there were so many people here to buy Rui nectar. This was beyond his expectations. It seemed that as long as the item was good, he didn't have to worry about not being able to sell it. Among these women, there was a woman he had seen 2 days ago. She was the first customer of the shop. It seemed that she had actively advertised the shop. He would give her a cost price later to show his gratitude. Li didn't know that for these women Rui nectar was only secondary. The main reason was that they were here to meet the elusive number 1 scholar of Qing'an Prefecture, or perhaps the number 1 scholar of the Jing Kingdom. As these women listened to his introduction, their gazes swept across the shop. Very quickly they were attracted by the paintings hanging on the walls. Among them, they were either young ladies of wealthy families or talented women of some renown in Qing'an Prefecture. They had received a good education from a young age and knew at least a little bit about poetry and painting. Although the many paintings in front of them were average in terms of meticulous brushwork and did not stand out, they looked so real. They had never seen anything like this in their lives. Thinking about the other person's identity, they more or less understood that he must have taken a different path and walked out of the traditional pattern of painting. It was rare to see someone with this kind of spirit and courage among the many scholars of Qing'an Prefecture. Most people in the prefectural city probably thought that Li of Shuadiao Getu was only good at poetry. They didn't know that his skill in painting had already reached a higher level, and his calligraphy had truly entered the realm of a grandmaster. It was laughable that those people had spread rumors that Li wasn't good at calligraphy. They didn't know that just the 3 words Rui Workshop was enough to shut everyone's mouths. But there was one thing they couldn't understand. Since he had such talent, Why didn't he pursue an official career and instead chose to be a small shopkeeper here? Could it be that at such a young age, he had already seen through all this and was a reclusive genius? With this doubt in their hearts, their interest in him grew. At the side, Li Yi's mouth was dry from talking. He turned his head to look at these women and found that they were all looking around, clearly not paying attention. He couldn't help but feel a little depressed. Were these women really here to buy ruidu? Could it be that they were sent by other shops to cause trouble? Luckily, these women didn't disappoint Li Yi. After a while, he bought 1 bottle and I bought 2. If you bought 3 bottles, I bought 4. If you bought 5 bottles, I bought 10. Very quickly, the ruidu that they had rushed to make yesterday was all sold out again. Ladies, if you think this ruidu is useful, you might as well introduce it to your acquaintances. If you buy more than 20 bottles at one time, you can give me another 2 bottles for free. Seeing these women taking out silver from their purses without even batting an eyelid, Li Yi immediately realized that these were the true customers of the ruidu, so he said with a smile on his face, all right. For young ladies like them, which of them didn't have a few close friends in their boudoir? Just like that, the rumors spread from 1 to 10, 10 to 100. Once they opened up a sales channel in this circle, everything else would follow naturally. Their publicity was naturally much better than hiring people to advertise on the street. Of course, this ruidu is very beneficial to women like us. Even if you don't say it, we will tell other sisters. A woman smiled sweetly and said, it's getting late. We won't disturb Li's business anymore. We will leave first. Ladies, goodbye. Welcome to come again next time. Li Yi stood at the door of the shop and waved goodbye with a smile on his face. They took the initiative to advertise for him. These women were all good people. After a moment, a puzzled expression suddenly appeared on his face. That's not right. How did they know my surname is Li? Beside him, a shop away, the fat boss of the cloth shop looked at him with a big face full of envy. Chapter 113. Li Yi thought hard for a long time to come up with a marketing strategy, but he didn't use it after all. In the last few days, the number of customers in Rui workshops suddenly increased. Every day before noon, the ruidu produced in a hurry the day before was sold out. Most of the customers were women, and their clothes and temperament were all extraordinary. They didn't look like ordinary people. From this point of view, those women were really trustworthy, and he didn't waste the 10% discount he gave them. The only thing he couldn't stand was that some women looked at him in a strange way after entering the store. Every time he thought about it, he got goosebumps. Apart from that, there were also some elegant scholars who bought the ruidu. Scholars who studied all day would inevitably feel dizzy. There were only a few people who could lift their heads and prick their buttocks to keep their spirits up, and they were the ones who didn't have the money to buy the ruidu. For those rich scholars, they could spend 1 tael of silver to buy a bottle of ruidu. When they were tired from reading, they could drop a few drops and instantly feel energetic. Their recitation efficiency would skyrocket. It was as if God was helping them. Of course, they wouldn't feel bad about spending 1 tael of silver. Fang's smile never disappeared from his face. The number of customers increased day by day. According to the current situation, the market should be far from saturated. Li Yi did not take the opportunity to rush the production and pass off shoddy goods as quality goods. Before he ran out of money, it was more important to build up his reputation. This was only the first product launched by Rui Lane. Only by building up his reputation could he earn more money in the future. Of course, the rarer something is, the more expensive it is. If ruidu was as abundant as plain water, only a fool would spend 1 tael of silver to buy it. With the increase of customers, Li Yi and Xiao Huan were obviously too busy to take care of all the customers at the same time. For the past 2 days, he had been thinking in his heart whether he should recruit more people or not. The business of Rui's workshop was already on the right track. If he had to do all the small things himself, it would go against his original intention. Making money was only for the sake of accumulating original capital and using the fastest time to embark on the path of retirement. In order to make money, he had to wake up earlier than the chickens and sleep later than the dogs. He had never been so tired in his previous life. It was not worth it. Rui Workshop's business was booming. Every day before noon, it would be sold out and closed for the day. Naturally, it attracted the attention of many people. Of course, the people who felt it the most were the surrounding shops. One was as crowded as a marketplace, while the other was completely deserted. After asking around, they found out that the newly opened shop was selling a small bottle of Rui nectar for 1 tael of silver. What was even more surprising was that there were actually so many people who went to buy it. As for the effects of the ruidu, they had also seen it from the signboard at the entrance. Wasn't slapping myself twice more effective than the ruidu? It repels mosquitoes and relieves the itch. What's wrong with being bitten twice by mosquitoes? You're actually spending a tael of silver to buy this thing. Prevents diseases. Nonsense. What kind of panacea do you think you're selling? However, after hearing about it, they only curled their lips and felt that no one would buy it. Just like that, it successfully squeezed into the circle of Qing and Prefecture socialites. It became the new favorite of the young ladies of Qing and Prefecture. Even the scholars of Qing and Prefecture held it in high esteem. This caused the business of Rui Workshop to flourish day by day. Of course, this was not without its disadvantages. After all, the customers who came out of the shop would sometimes walk around the surrounding shops and buy things when they were in a good mood. This caused their business to increase. Their profits increased by more than 10%. Regarding this, the shopkeepers felt extremely complicated. They didn't know whether they should be happy or worried. At noon, the sun had not yet risen above their heads. In Rui Workshop, Li Yi had already sold the last bottle of ruidu. At the entrance of the shop, he hung a "sold out today" sign. He sat on a chair tiredly. Xiao Huan walked over from the side and placed her small hand on his shoulder, gently massaging it. His eyes stared ahead in a daze as if he had a lot on his mind. When the first girl secretly gave him the handkerchief embroidered with mandarin ducks and "Immortals of the Magpie Bridge," Li Yi realized that something was wrong. Later, he saw a few girls secretly fighting over an order that he had personally written. The board on the door was stolen by someone in the middle of the night. It was replaced with a new one, and within 2 days it was stolen again. At this time he finally understood that he had most likely been exposed. The spread of "Immortals of the Magpie Bridge" was purely accidental. As for Shuidiao Getu, it was purely forced by that Xinjiao. He had not the slightest bit of precaution and had inexplicably become so popular. Li Yi expressed his innocence. He only wanted to do a small business. He didn't want to become some #1 scholar. Compared to this title, it was more practical to give him a few hundred taels of silver. He was half happy and half worried. Although his peaceful life had been disturbed, it wasn't completely without benefits. The booming business of Rui Workshop was most likely due to the fame brought about by the 2 poems. After all, in this world, the effect of a scholar was equivalent to the effect of a celebrity in the future. If Yang Yinzhou held a small porcelain bottle and said a few lines, "Rui nectar, women say it's good after using it," and put up such an advertisement, perhaps even the Dorzil of this place would be trampled to pieces by the women who admired him. Of course, with Li Yi's current fame, if he personally stood up to promote Rui Workshop, the effect would probably be even better. Then he would throw out a few famous poems, famous paintings from past dynasties, and a copy of Wang Shiji's preface to the Orchid Pavilion. He would hang them on the wall. Anyone who wanted to enter the shop would have to pay 1 tael of silver. Never underestimate the temptation of these things to scholars. Although this was extremely vulgar, Li Yi did not doubt that there would still be countless people flocking to the shop. Up until now, earning money was still his main goal in life. However, Li Yi could not accept this kind of immoral way of earning money with a clear conscience for the time being. The most difficult and stressful period had passed. The shop's business should be stable for a while. Li Yi also finally let out a sigh of relief. It was time to give himself a break and relax. The little servant girl stood behind Li Yi. The strength of her hand was gentle. She could see that the son-in-law was thinking about something. She slowed down her breathing and tried not to make a sound. However, the smile on the corner of her mouth could not be concealed. The matters of Rui Workshop had always been handled by her and Li Yi. When she thought of something, her eyes turned into crescent moons. These days, son-in-law has earned a lot of money. Chapter 114. In less than half a day, the new batch of Rui nectar was sold out again. Even the prepaid order was 7 days later. Li Yi closed the shop as usual and went back to the stockade village with the little maid. Not long after, a carriage left the shop. After driving out of the mansion, it went straight along the official road. After a little more than 15 minutes, it arrived at the foot of Green Willow Mountain. If they didn't continue along the official road, it would be a rugged mountain road. The carriage would be difficult to travel. The young coachman jumped off the carriage, turned around and said loudly, "Sir, we've arrived." The curtain of the carriage opened. Li Yi took Xiaowan's hand and got off the carriage. He took out 10 copper coins from his waist and handed it to the coachman. He said, "Tomorrow is the same time. Remember to wait here." Okay. The coachman put away the copper coins and said with a silly smile, "Sir, don't worry. I will wait here for you tomorrow morning. I won't delay your business." For this coachman, the young master in front of him was already a regular customer. The business of the carriage shop was not very good. He was naturally satisfied with a stable customer who would rent a carriage twice a day. Li waved his hand and watched the coachman drive away. He walked towards the stockade village with the little maid. Between Willow Leaf Village and Qing and Prefecture, except for this section of mountain road, there were mostly flat roads that could be used by carriages. Renting a carriage could save more than half of the time compared to walking. Although the carriage was a little bumpy on the official road after leaving the prefectural city, it was not too violent. Since Li Yi knew that there was such a business as driving a carriage in the prefectural city, he often used this means of transportation. For ordinary people, in order to save 10 copper coins, they would rather choose to walk. But now the business of Rui workshop was so good that he could earn dozens of silver coins every day. He didn't need to save money in these places. What's more, the time saved was enough for him to create more than 10 copper coins. After walking on the mountain road for less than an hour, they could see the stockade village. Not long after entering the stockade village, they saw Fang surrounded by a few girls. He looked embarrassed and didn't know what happened. Today, Fang was the most successful man in the Willow Leaf Village except for Li Yi. He was envied by countless people. Li Yi was a lazy person. After the business of the candied haws and the workshop went on the right track, he completely let go and let Fang take charge. Now, even the direct descendants of the Lu family had to act according to Fang's wishes. In the eyes of others, he was naturally awe-inspiring. More than once, Li Yi had seen several women gathered together and talked about how much virtue Fang's wife had accumulated in her previous life to be able to marry such a capable man. Their words were full of admiration for Fang, just like an older fangirl. Of course, Li Yi had never mentioned this to Fang. He did not want him to get carried away and harm a married woman. He did not want to cause a tragedy and destroy the harmony and stability of the stronghold. However, this was only limited to those women. When would these girls also? This made Li Yi a little hard to imagine. Did he really underestimate Fang's charm before? "Uncle Fang, please help us." The girls looked at Fang and begged. Fang was never good at dealing with women. Being surrounded by so many girls, he could not help but feel a headache. He said with an embarrassed face, "It's not that I don't want to help you, but there is no shortage of people in the candied haws factory. You can't help much even if you go there. The work in the workshop is not something that you girls can do. We have nothing to do at home all day. Uncle Fang, please help us. There are many things we can do." "Yes, Uncle Fang, I beg you." Only Uncle Fang could help them with this matter. The girls did not give up and continued to beg. When the voices entered his ears, Fang felt a headache again. He glanced around and suddenly saw a familiar figure walking towards him. As if he had been granted amnesty, he immediately strode over. "Son-in-law, you're back." "Brother-in-law." Seeing Li Yi, the girls also bowed in a reserved manner. "What's going on?" Li Yi looked at Fang and asked with some doubt. "These children don't want to stay in the village. They insisted that I find some work for them." Fang looked at Li Yi and said helplessly, "There is no shortage of people in the candied haws factory. As for the workshop, as you know, son-in-law." Li Yi nodded. After the direct descendants of the Lu family joined, the candied haws business had reached a saturation point. As for the workshop, no one was allowed to go near it on normal days. The biggest reason was confidentiality. Another reason was because of safety issues. The workshop involved alcohol and fire, so it was not suitable for these women. In my opinion, women should stay in the village, cook and take care of the house. It's really not suitable for them to go out and show their faces. Fang looked up at Li Yi and asked, "Son-in-law, don't you think so?" When the girls beside Fang heard this, a look of disappointment appeared on their pretty faces. They could not help but lower their heads. Uncle Fang was right. As women, especially unmarried women, they should be respectful and not show their faces in public. However, their parents were busy at home. Even Sister Qing was teaching the children in the school. It seemed that everyone had something to do, but they were the only ones idling around at home. Naturally, they did not feel good about it. Li Yi glanced at Fang. For these girls to make such a request, they were much more ambitious than Fang. He turned to look at them and said with a smile, It just so happens that Rui Workshop has been very busy recently. If you are willing, you can go there and help out. Son-in-law this. Fang looked up at Li Yi with a face full of surprise. Really? The girls looked up with the same look of disbelief. Li Yi nodded and said, the shops in the prefectural city have been very busy recently. You can go to the shops tomorrow after you pack up today. He did not expect these girls to have such intentions. However, he had already planned to hire people. These girls were his people and could be trusted. Instead of hiring a few outsiders, it was better to let them go. Thank you, brother-in-law. The girls were overjoyed. Their pretty faces immediately bloomed with smiles as they quickly thanked him. Of course, this matter must first be approved by your families. Seeing their excited expressions, Li Yi added. One of the girls smiled and said, don't worry, brother-in-law. They have already agreed. Since their families had agreed, Li Yi naturally did not have any objections. He went to the workshop to take a look and instructed Fang and the rest to hurry up with the production of the new batch of Ruidu. Previously, he did not expect that the Ruidu would be in such short supply. When the funds were sufficient and they could start producing spirits, such a small workshop would not be able to meet the production requirements. By that time, even the manpower would be insufficient. Chapter 115. After returning to the stockade village, he first went to the workshop that made Rui's nectar. The autumn weather was a bit chilly, but in the workshop, several men topless were working in full swing. Although their daily work was very simple, they obviously didn't feel bored and were full of energy at all times. It was no wonder. What they did here was not tiring work. It was much easier than herding horses or doing farm work. Not only that, they had meat to eat and wine to drink every day. At night, they could sit on the kong with their wives and count the money. After counting the money, they would hide it. When they were in the mood, they could do something shameless. Life was very comfortable. Li Yi stood outside the workshop and looked at it from afar. Everything was normal, so he turned around and walked in the direction of his home. When he reached the door, he smelled a faint aroma of food before he stepped into the yard. Xiao Huan went to the shop with him in the morning, so it was naturally not her cooking. Mississippi Lu, not to mention that she didn't know how to cook. Even if she did, Li Yi might not dare to eat it. In the past, it was Xiao Huan or himself who cooked, so Li Yi subconsciously thought that the two sisters didn't know how to cook. It was not until a few days ago that he found out that Rui also had extraordinary cooking skills. Even Xiao Huan, who had learned some of his skills, couldn't compare. Later, it was Xiao Huan who told him that before the old master left, when Xiao Huan and second miss were young, it was always the eldest miss who cooked. Xiao Huan learned most of her cooking skills from her. If it was in the future, she would probably be the kind of girl who was good-tempered, had extraordinary cooking skills, and had a black belt in Taekwondo. She would be the goddess in the hearts of countless men, and of course she was also the ideal type for Li Yi. But at that time he couldn't be more ordinary. This kind of goddess-like girl probably wouldn't even look him in the eye. Now that he thought about it, in his previous life he often gave up his seat to old people on the bus, occasionally helped old grannies cross the road, and was willing to help others without pocketing the money he picked up. In the end there were rewards. My husband, you're back. After you've washed your hands, come and eat. As soon as Li Yi stepped into the courtyard, he heard a gentle voice. After living together for so long, Lu Rui was no longer surprised by Li Yi's habit of washing his hands before eating. Recently, Li Yi came back around this time every day. By the time he reached home, the meal was already prepared. The feeling of always having someone waiting for him at home was very good. Not far away, Xiao Huan had already taken the initiative to fetch water for him. An imperceptible smile appeared on Li Yi's face as he strode over. Brother Qian, you seem to be in a hurry. Where are you going? Rui Square. Rui Place sounds unfamiliar. Could it be a new brothel in the prefecture? Brother Qian, you're not being honest. Why didn't you call little brother over for such a good thing? Why don't we go together? We can see for ourselves what kind of girls from Rui Place are like. On the streets of Qing and prefecture, Fang heard the conversation between two scholarly men. He pursed his lips and muttered, I was right, wasn't I? This is obviously the name of a brothel. Second mistress still doesn't believe me? Li Yi glanced at Fang. This fellow had righteously told him that other than Rui Place, nothing else was suitable for the name of the shop. The few of them had rejected his suggestion of Six Spirits Place. Their opinions were unanimous. He had no choice but to name the shop Rui Place. If it had been called Six Spirits Place, there would not have been so many misunderstandings, right? Of course, the name Rui Place was not without its merits. At least it could attract a large group of men who did not know the truth. Li Yi was extremely suspicious that the scholars who bought the Rui necklaces only had the same intentions as what the scholar had said. Behind the two of them, the faces of the four young girls were filled with excitement. They usually stayed in the village and rarely came to the prefecture. There were many things here that were full of novelty to them. With these young girls, Li Yi did not have to stay in the shop all the time. He could completely be a shopkeeper who did not have to do anything. When he had time, he would go to the brothel to listen to music. When he was in a better mood, he would accept the invitations of the girls and have a meal with them. They could talk about their dreams and life. Come on, have fun. After all, he had a lot of time. At the entrance of Rui Place there were already many people waiting. Among these people, there were those who had already placed orders and were here today to collect the goods. There were also those who had specially come to place orders. Fang carried a large bamboo basket on his back. It was filled with the latest batch of Rui necklaces. The shopkeeper is here. Shopkeeper, hurry up and open the door. We have been waiting here for a long time. After collecting the goods, I still have to go back and study. When the crowd saw Li Yi and Fang walk over, there was immediately a commotion. Everyone, don't push. Those whose orders say that they will be delivered today, please wait over there for a moment. Those who need to place an order, please come this way. Li Yi could already handle these situations easily. As he spoke, the crowd immediately split into two groups. They consciously lined up and stood in their respective areas. I say, shopkeeper, can't you bring more goods every day? There are so many people here, how is this enough? A certain man couldn't help but complain when he realized that his order had been queued up for several days. As soon as his words left his mouth, it immediately resonated with the people around him. That's right, shopkeeper. The goods every day are really too little. I placed an order 2 days ago and only received it today. What, 2 days ago? Did you cut the queue? I placed an order 7 days ago. Li Yi stretched out his hand and gestured for the crowd to be quiet. He then explained, everyone may not know this, but the production process of this Rui Do is quite complicated. We work day and night, but we can only produce a few dozen bottles a day. If we produce more, I'm afraid that the efficacy will decrease. The crowd was obviously very satisfied with this explanation. The Rui Do was a strange item that had never been seen before. It was normal for the production process to be complicated. No wonder it was so expensive to sell it for 1 tael of silver. And this shopkeeper was obviously a merchant with a conscience. In order to not reduce the efficacy of the Rui Do, he was willing to earn so much money. He was really a model for other shops. For a moment, the crowd couldn't help but look at him with respect. After a while, the customer who received the Rui Do left with satisfaction. The crowd who placed the order and could only pick up the goods after a few days were not too dissatisfied. After all, where could they find a shopkeeper who was so considerate to them? It was fine to wait for a few days as long as the quality of the goods was guaranteed. Seeing that there were not many Rui Do left and a thick stack of orders on the counter, Fang couldn't hide the silly smile on his face. He glanced at the door and saw someone coming in, so he hurriedly walked over. I'm sorry, today's Rui Do is sold out. If you didn't place an order in advance, you can only place an order and pick up the goods after a few days. Are you the shopkeeper here? The person who came was a young man. He glanced sideways at Fang, and a trace of disdain appeared in his eyes when he saw his clothes. Didn't you hear the young master asking you a question? Are you the shopkeeper here? The two young men behind the young man glared at Fang when they saw that he didn't speak. Seeing the disdainful expression on the young man's face and the arrogant look of the two people behind him, Fang narrowed his eyes. These people didn't come with good intentions. Chapter 116. What are you doing? Fang crossed his arms and stared at them with wide eyes. An invisible force pressed towards them. Since they were not customers and seemed to be here to cause trouble, Fang did not stand on ceremony with them. Putting aside the fact that Fang had a foundation in martial arts, being stared at by such a burly man was very oppressive. Normal people would feel a bit scared if they saw this. Fang's ox-like eyes glared and a chill suddenly rose in the young man's heart. He couldn't help but take a few steps back. After he came to his senses, he felt a bit angry, but he didn't dare to glare at him. He suddenly raised his voice. Who is the shopkeeper of Rui Workshop? Li Yi had actually been paying attention to this side since they entered the door. At this time he stood up and slowly walked over. He looked at the young man indifferently and asked, "What is it? You are the shopkeeper of Rui Workshop?" The young man looked at him with surprise. He didn't think that the famous shopkeeper of Rui Workshop in Qing and Prefectural City would be such a young scholar. "What is it? Speak." The young man in front of him, from his expression to his attitude, was full of the appearance of a playboy. He didn't look like he was in business. If it wasn't for the principle that those who came were guests, Li Yi wouldn't have bothered with him. "Our young master is looking for you. Of course it's a good thing." The young man didn't say anything. Another young man beside him spoke up. "Our young master will buy the recipe for your Rui Du for 1,000 liang of silver." After the young man finished speaking, a faint smile appeared on the young man's face. He had a card up his sleeve. 1,000 liang of silver. They had probably never seen so much silver in their lives. A mere formula could be sold for 1,000 taels of silver. The young man was waiting for the poor scholar to be deeply grateful to him. Then he would respectfully hand over the formula of the Rui Du. That way he would have achieved his goal. Recently, this thing called Rui Du had spread among the social circles of Qing and Prefectural City's young ladies and scholars. Everyone fought to buy it and it had become a fashion trend. However, the store only supplied a few dozen bottles a day. There were so many scholars and beautiful women in Qing and Prefectural City. Most people wanted to buy it but couldn't. After he bought a bottle through various channels, he personally tried it and immediately realized the value it contained. In the summer it was cool and refreshing, and in the autumn, it repelled mosquitoes and insects. When one was tired, a few drops would immediately refresh one's mind and increase one's vigor. The effects of the Rui Du were just like its name, extremely miraculous. In his opinion, this small shop in Qing and Prefectural City was far from enough. If he opened a few more shops, how much profit would he be able to make? If he opened the store in the capital and entered the circle of true nobles, he could already see a mountain of silver floating in front of him. Of course, all of this was under the premise that he could successfully obtain the recipe for Rui Du. However, he was not worried about this. Before he came, he had already investigated the owner of this store. He was a commoner with no background. If the other party was unwilling, he had countless ways to achieve his goal. Fong. As soon as Li Yi spoke, Fong immediately straightened his body. "See the guest out," Li Yi said lightly and turned to walk in the direction of the counter. 1,000 liang of silver for the recipe for Rui Du? Even if this number was increased by 10 times or 100 times, he still wouldn't agree. Whether it was the Rui Du or the perfume and spirits that were still in the planning stages, the core technology was alcohol distillation. This was related to his future business. Li Yi couldn't sell distillation. "Gentlemen, please?" Fong stood in front of the three and said coldly. 1,000 liang of silver for the recipe for Rui Du? Dream on. Although Fong was a bit stupid, he was not a fool. According to the store's recent income, he could earn 1,000 liang of silver in less than a month. Even if Li Yi agreed to sell the recipe for 1,000 liang of silver, Fong would not agree. The change happened too quickly. The young man couldn't react in time, and his smile froze on his face. Things were a little different from what he had expected. In his previous view, if the other party was not tactful and didn't want to sell the recipe, he could increase the price. He could also accept 2,000 liang of silver. If the other party didn't know what was good for him and brought up his identity, then everything would be settled. But who would have thought that this scholar wouldn't even give him a chance to bring up his identity? He turned hostile like flipping a book. "How dare you? Do you know that my master is?" A young man beside the young man revealed an angry expression. He had just opened his mouth to say a few words when he was glared at by Fong. Fong didn't care who this guy was. Even if the county magistrate was here, he had to be reasonable. Whoever wanted to rob Fong of his money was his enemy. He clenched his fist and revealed a fierce expression. He said fiercely, "If you don't leave, I will personally send you out." Seeing the burly man in front of them clenching his joints so hard that they made cracking sounds, the three of them turned pale and couldn't help but take a few steps back. The young man raised his head and said coldly, "In this prefecture city, it's best to lower your heads. Otherwise you won't even know how you die. How dare you threaten me?" A trace of anger appeared on Fong's face. He casually picked up a chair beside him. The young man was about to say something, but he was dragged away by the two young men beside him. "You run fast. If I see you again, I will break your legs," Fong said fiercely. He looked at the backs of the three fleeing figures and put down the chair heavily. These bastards wanted to buy our formula for 1,000 taels of silver. Why didn't they just rob? Fang was still angry even after the three of them had left for a long time. Li Yi sat behind the counter and looked thoughtfully at the bustling pedestrians on the street outside. Today's foppish young master had also given him a reminder. An ordinary man is innocent, but a man's wealth is a crime. The profits of the Ruidu were huge, and as time passed, it would definitely attract the attention of more people. Even in the future, this kind of robbery was common, not to mention in this era for some people the restriction of the law was extremely low. Moreover, the launch of Ruidu was only the first step. If the business became bigger in the future, it was hard to guarantee that it wouldn't be targeted by more people. At that time, what should he do? After all, he was just a commoner. If he really encountered such a thing, should he let Fang beat them up? Beat them up? Or beat them up? Obviously, this was not the solution to the problem. An individual's martial strength was completely useless at this time. Just as Li Yi thought of this and frowned, someone walked in from the entrance of the shop. Chapter 117. Old Fang turned around and saw a few men following behind a young man walking in from outside. The young man was dressed in luxurious clothes and had an extraordinary temperament. However, the few men behind him all had solemn expressions. They were equipped with swords and sabers at their waists, and their faces were expressionless. They looked at people as if they were owed a few hundred taels of silver. As soon as they walked into the shop, a formless, murderous atmosphere filled the air. Seeing this, the two women who were about to enter the shop turned pale and hurriedly retreated. They had just sent away a few people, and now another group of troublemakers had come? A trace of anger appeared on Fang's face. He suddenly stood up from his seat and stared at the men with an unfriendly look. It seemed that if they dared to show any malicious intent, he would attack them in the next moment. Seeing his aggressive look, the young man was stunned for a moment. The men behind him all changed their expressions and looked at Fang with vigilance. One of their hands was already on the hilt of the saber at their waists. Fang's expression became a little ugly. Then he became serious, which was rare for him. These people were all not simple. If he had to face one of them, he had the confidence to win. However, if he had to face all of them at the same time, he had no hope of winning. Fang and the men were confronting each other nervously. The young man walked past him and saw Li Yi coming out from behind the counter. He asked with some surprise, "Did you really open the Rui workshop that has recently become famous in Qingyan Prefecture?" Li Yi wanted to say, "Are you blind?" But he remembered that the man was a young prince, so he held back. As soon as he turned his head, he saw Fang and Li Xian's attendants making eyes at each other affectionately. He couldn't help but feel a chill and said, "What are you doing?" Li Xian followed his gaze. After a moment of surprise, he waved his hand and said to the men, "Why are you following me? Get out." Among the men, the leader saw the young man in the shop and finally felt relieved. He waved his hand and the men immediately left the shop. He and Li Yi were old acquaintances. He knew that the young man had cured the princess's illness and was a friend of the young prince. He would not do anything harmful to the young prince. However, he was puzzled as to why the young man always had masters following him. Although the big man in front of him looked simple and honest, his strength could not be underestimated. The young woman who followed him last time had unfathomable martial arts. Even in the whole Jianghu, she could not be an unknown person. Seeing the scene in front of him, Fang finally realized that the young man and the son-in-law knew each other. He was also relieved. He walked out of the shop and happened to meet the eyes of the man. There seemed to be some kind of fire when their eyes met. Inside the shop, Li Yi looked around for a moment. After a while, he withdrew his gaze and said to Li Yi, "That Ruidu, give me 100 bottles first. I will take them with me when I leave." Last time he heard from Li Yi that he was going to open a shop in Qingyan Prefecture to sell Ruidu. He was curious for a while about what this Ruidu was. Later, because he was busy with other things, he temporarily forgot about it. Recently, Li Xian had also heard about the Ruidu that was popular in the circle of socialites and scholars. In his heart, he did not believe that the two were the same thing. He heard that it had the effect of repelling mosquitoes. Today he wanted to buy some to show his filial piety to the princess. Only then did he find that the shopkeeper of the shop was actually Li Yi. 100 bottles? Li Yi glanced at him. Don't even mention 100 bottles, there isn't even a single bottle. Today's Ruidu has already been sold out, and the order list is 7 days later. If you want to get your hands on the Ruidu, you'll have to wait at least 7 days. What's more, Ruidu can only be bought at most 20 bottles at a time. This rule was set by Li Yi. The purpose was to prevent some people from buying a large amount of Ruidu and then reselling it at a high price. 7 days? Li Xian was stunned for a moment, then directly shook his head and said, 7 days is too long. I can't wait that long. He reached out and patted Li Yi on the shoulder. His eyes were bright. Although he did not say anything, the meaning was already very clear. After all, the two of them were friends who went to the brothel together. If he did not even help this little bit, it would be a little too unfriendly. Li Yi sighed and said, the production process of Ruidu is very complicated. It takes several hours to produce a bottle of Ruidu. What's more, we lack manpower, so it is impossible to produce a large amount. What's so difficult? Can't I find some people from the prince's mansion to help you? Li Xian was stunned for a moment, then he waved his hand, indicating that this was not a problem at all. Li Yi shook his head. Having manpower is not enough. To produce Ruidu, not only do we need to build a workshop, but we also need to buy raw materials, which requires a lot of money. What's more, we can't put all our energy into Ruidu. Rui Workshop is about to start releasing perfume and spirits, so we also need manpower. I don't need to trouble you with these things. I'll ask them to speed up the work. In 3 days we can't gather 100 bottles of Ruidu, but there will be 50 bottles. You can send someone to pick it up at that time. Perfume? The expression on Li Xian's face was stunned. What is this? A puzzled expression flashed across his face. He turned to look at Li Yi and murmured, spirits, how strong is it? Li Yi took a small porcelain bottle from the counter and opened the lid. A very strong wine fragrance floated out of the bottle. This was the alcohol obtained after more than 10 times of distillation. Although it had been blended, the alcohol content was still several times higher than the so-called spirits on the market. Good wine. As the wine fragrance entered his nose, an abnormal blush appeared on Li Xian's face. His body swayed and he grabbed the counter. He looked at Li Yi and said with burning eyes, I'll help you with the manpower and workshop. You just need to tell me how this spirit is brewed, and, that perfume, what is it? Li Yi couldn't understand why a person with such a poor alcohol tolerance would be so interested in hard liquor. However, this wasn't important to him. He looked at Li Xian with a smile and said, how could I let you work for free? Why don't we consider this business a partnership? We'll split the profits 50-50. How about that? That's a good idea. Li Xian heard this, and after a moment of daze, he nodded without hesitation. He didn't want to accept other people's kindness for free. He was originally a greedy person, but he would rather give up 50% of the profits. He really didn't misjudge him. Outside the door, the leading man and Fong crossed their wrists to test their strength. Their faces were flushed and fine beads of sweat appeared on their foreheads. On the contrary, Fong looked calm and there was a hint of mockery at the corner of his mouth. In terms of fighting, he might not be able to beat him, but in terms of strength, no one in the whole Willow Leaves village could beat him. His opponent was still far behind. Next to the two of them, the faces of the few men revealed a bit of shock. Their leader was known for his strength, but compared to this big man, it was obvious that he was far from enough. Where did this monster come from? Gulp. At this time, a strong wine fragrance floated out of the shop. Except for Fong, everyone couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Chapter 118. When the young prince, Li Xian, left with those people, he took 10 bottles of Ruidu. Although it was announced that Ruidu had long been sold out, there had to be some spares left in the shop. This time, Li Yi simply let him take all of it. After his step-by-step seduction, the final goal was achieved. Li Yi watched as the group left, and the smile on his face brightened. Originally, he had only wanted to start a small business. Under the condition that he wouldn't starve, he wanted to raise the standard of living a little, and at the same time he wanted to lead Fong and the others into a well-off life. Originally, the Rui workshop and the candied Ha's business could satisfy this small wish. However, in the Jianghu, some things were not as simple as they seemed. The business of Ruidu was a large cake. There were probably countless people watching from afar wanting a piece of it. Li was just a commoner. He didn't want to compromise, but he also couldn't fight against the local snake in Qing and Fu. With no other choice, he could only choose to hug a thicker thigh. In Qing and Fu, there was no thigh that was thicker than Ning Wangfu's thigh. If the business wanted to grow, it needed more manpower, resources, and financial resources. It was clearly impossible to rely on just Fang and the others. They could only find others to cooperate with. Cooperating with Ning Wangfu was clearly the most suitable and the best way to solve the problem once and for all. In this small piece of land, no one dared to compete with Ning Wangfu for business. He only needed to contribute the recipe, and then he could sit at home and count the money. Although he was using the curiosity of the young prince, this was a win-win situation. The profits of Rui Du were considerable. Furthermore, Li Yi also planned to work with him for a long time. Ning Wangfu wouldn't lose out, and Li Yi could use this huge umbrella of protection to be a shopkeeper who didn't have to do anything. Of course, after interacting with the young prince a few times, Li Yi also found him to be quite pleasing to the eye. He was one of the few friends he acknowledged. They were all from the old Li family. To some extent, the goodies should be kept within the family. Now that his worries had been resolved, Li Xian went back to make preparations for the manpower, workshop and shop. He could handle such a small matter by himself. In fact, when Li Yi suggested a 50-50 split, he didn't even think about it before agreeing. This caused Li Yi to admire him even more. The young man's thinking was very advanced. Originally, Li Yi wanted to explain to him about intellectual property rights, but now it seemed that there was no need for that. In the following time he did some small training for the girls. It took a little time to teach them how to write orders. Although the format of the order was fixed and Li Yi could write it in advance, they had to fill in the delivery date and quantity by themselves. He needed to teach them how to write the number and date. Fang also had something to do. Of course, it was not enough to have only a few girls in the shop. If there were any bad customers or hooligans, Fang had to go out personally and temporarily act as a flower protector. Everyone had their own division of labor, so there was nothing for Li Yi to do. He made a cup of tea and lazily lay in the yard behind the shop. While basking in the sun, he looked for a few books in the library in his mind to recharge. In Jianghu it was never a burden to have more skills. Maybe they would be useful one day. The position of this yard was facing the sun, and the sun was warm on the body. Li Yi closed his eyes and digested what he had just read. Suddenly everything went black. When he opened his eyes he saw Fang standing straight in front of him, just blocking the sun. "Son-in-law, someone is looking for you." Fang looked at Li Yi with a strange expression on his face. He wanted to say something but stopped. When Li Yi stood up, Fang added, "It is a beautiful woman." "And I got it." Li Yi nodded and turned to walk into the shop. Recently, there would occasionally be women coming over and asking him to write something on a piece of paper. He had long been used to it. Of course, there were some scholars in the beginning, but after they heard that he had to pay 1 tael of silver to write a word, gradually no one came. Being able to enjoy the treatment of a star also made Li Yi's vanity a little satisfied. However, in Fang's view it was not like this. "And I got it? What kind of attitude is this? There is a beautiful woman looking for him? Isn't he worried that I will tell the big miss?" A trace of hesitation appeared on Fang's face. After thinking about it he still followed. Seeing that the young master was so calm, it did not seem like he had a guilty conscience. What if he was thinking too much? Li Yi walked into the shop from the back door. Several girls were practicing what he had just taught them at the counter. In the resting area opposite, a young woman was sitting there with a pretty maid standing behind her. The young woman seemed to be holding something in her hand. At this moment, all her attention was on the paintings around the wall, fascinated. Seeing the woman from afar, a trace of doubt appeared in Li Yi's eyes. He walked to the woman and asked, "May I know why Miss Zumo is here today?" He did not expect that the person who came here to find him was actually the top artist of the Jade Courtyard. Li Yi and she had some small misunderstandings before, but they had later reconciled. However, the two of them had only met twice at the poetry conference and had no further interaction. "Zumo is here to return the painting to young master." Zheng Zumo stood up, curtsied, and handed the thing in her hand to Li Yi. "Painting?" Seeing that she handed over a paper tube, Li Yi was even more puzzled. When did she take his painting? He turned to look at the surrounding walls. Not a single painting was missing? Puzzled, he untied the string in the middle of the paper tube and slowly arranged the paper tube on the table beside him. Seeing the painting of a woman in martial attire on the paper, the expression on Li Yi's face froze for an instant. Lu Rui, it was actually Lu Rui. The painting was three-dimensional, so it should have been drawn by him. However, he had only drawn Lu Rui once, and that painting was still locked in the cabinet in his room. But what was with the painting in front of him? "I'm afraid that young master took the wrong painting that day. Please return the painting that you took away to me." Zheng Zumo did not notice the change in Li Yi's expression and looked up at him. A strange feeling welled up in Zheng Zumo's heart at the thought that her painting was in the hands of a man. Coincidentally, she heard that the scholar who defeated Xin Zhao in poetry was in this Rui workshop, so she immediately brought the painting over. However, Li Yi did not give Zheng Zumo an answer. His mind was still a bit confused at the moment. If he had taken the wrong painting that day, if this painting had fallen into Zheng Zumo's hands, then the painting he had taken away that day was actually her portrait. Li Yi raised his head and glanced at her. He finally realized that the reason why he felt a sense of familiarity when he saw her at the intoxicated fragrance house was not because he went to the jadeite courtyard with Li Xian that night, but because he had seen her portrait at the art stall. Fang walked to Li Yi's side with doubt and looked at the table. After a moment of shock, his eyes suddenly widened, as if he had seen something extremely incredible. Young master actually secretly hid a portrait of second miss. A voice, like thunder, exploded in Fang's mind. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.